Welcome back to Cosmic Wand, where the impossible always gets the last word. Today's adventure: Dumbledore sealed Harry's magic 9 times, but at his sorting a voice said, "Final lock broken." Before we dive in, do smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so a brand new story always finds its way to you. Now settle in and let's begin. Chapter 1: Final lock broken. Harry Potter had spent 10 years learning to be small, and he was good at it, which is a different thing from liking it. The trick was arithmetic. A house with 4 people in it has a certain amount of attention to hand out, and if you subtracted Dudley's share and Vernon's and the share Petunia spent on the neighbors, what remained for the cupboard under the stairs rounded to nothing. Harry had learned to live inside that nothing. He knew which stair announced you and which stair kept your secret. He knew that a boy who finished his chores before he was asked got hit less than a boy who waited. He knew above all that odd things happened around him, and that the safest response to an odd thing was to look as surprised as everyone else. The odd things were never large. That was the part he could not explain in the years afterward to people who assumed his childhood must have been a slow drum roll of impossible events. His hair grew back overnight after a bad haircut once. A jumper shrank away from his neck rather than over his head. A teacher's chalk snapped when she reached for it to underline his name on the board, small, muffled almost as if the strangeness were happening to him through a wall, and someone on the other side kept turning the volume down before it could get interesting. There had been one afternoon he came back to more than the others. He was 7, and Dudley and 2 of Dudley's friends had chased him around the back of the school and cornered him against the wall of the bike shed, and Harry had done the thing he always did, which was make himself small and wait for it to be over. Except that afternoon something in him had not wanted to wait. He remembered a pressure building behind his eyes, a heat, a sense of a fist closing somewhere he had no fist, and he remembered thinking, with a child's whole heart, stop. And the 3 of them had stopped, just stopped mid-stride, blinking, the way people stop when they walk into a room and lose the reason they came. Then a shudder had gone through all of it, a cold ripple like a hand smoothing a bedsheet, and the heat behind his eyes had drained away, and Dudley had shaken his head and laughed and shoved him into the wall anyway, and the moment was gone, capped, filed by some hand that was not Harry's under the general heading of nothing happened. He had felt that day that he'd been about to do something. He had never been able to find the edge of it again. Each time he reached for it, the reaching itself grew quieter and the wall grew thicker, and he had learned eventually to stop reaching, which he would understand much later was exactly what the wall had been built to teach him. He had a theory that he was broken, not in a self-pitying way, in an engineering way. Other people, he'd noticed, ran on something he didn't have a full tank of. He got tired faster, cold sank into him deeper. When he was frightened, which the Dursleys arranged for with some regularity, the fear had nowhere to go and just sat in his chest like a swallowed stone. He assumed everyone had a stone. He assumed his was simply heavier because he was, in some fundamental and unfixable way, less. He was wrong about that, and had been wrong about it since before he could form the words for it, and the machinery of how wrong he was had been installed in him with great care by a person who loved him in the particular way that a chess player loves a piece he intends to sacrifice well. Harry did not know any of that yet. What he knew on the 1st of September was that a giant had come to a hut on a rock in the sea and told him he was a wizard, and that this explained the odd small things, and that he was going to a school in a castle, and that for the first time the arithmetic of attention might come out differently. He did not let himself want it too much. Wanting things was how you got hurt. But he stood on the platform between the 9s and the 10s with a trolley and a snowy owl and a scar, and he ran at a brick wall because a boy had told him to, and the wall let him through. That was the first thing that had ever let him through. The train was a country of its own, and Harry moved through it as he moved through any new place, cataloging exits. He found an empty compartment near the back and put his back to the window so he could see the door. A red-headed boy asked if the seat was taken, and Harry said no, and that was Ron Weasley, who had a smudge on his nose and a rat that did nothing, and a family that seemed to spill out of him in stories whether he meant to tell them or not. Harry liked him within about 4 minutes, which was fast for Harry. Ron was uncomplicated in a way that felt like a window opened in a stuffy room. He wanted things out loud. He wanted the Chudley Cannons to win, and he wanted to not be the 6th brother following 5 brothers down a corridor everyone had already walked, and he said both of these things to a stranger on a train because it did not occur to him that a stranger might use them against him. Harry filed that under interesting and did not examine why it needed filing. Then the door slid open, and a girl with a great deal of hair and a voice already braced for an argument asked if they'd seen a toad, and not waiting for an answer, informed them that she was Hermione Granger and that she had read all the set books twice. She watched Ron try a spell that did not work, and something in her face flickered, quick, like a card turned face up and then down again, and Harry understood her too, though it took him longer. She had learned to be large as he had learned to be small. She led with the reading because the reading was armor. If you knew the most, they couldn't tell you that you didn't belong. "You've got dirt on your nose," she told Ron. "Did you know? Just there." and she was gone, and Ron said something rude, and Harry looked out the window at England turning wild and thought, 3 of us, and none of us sure we get to keep the seat. The door opened a third time, and this time it did not knock. A pale boy with a chin he led with stood in the gap, flanked by 2 larger boys who stood the way furniture stands, there to fill a space and take a blow. "They're saying down the train that Harry Potter's in this compartment," the pale boy said, and his eyes went over Ron's second-hand robes and freckles and did their sorting in half a second, and settled on Harry with the frank appraisal of someone pricing an object. "So it's you." "It's me," Harry agreed and watched. He was good at watching. It was the one skill his childhood had given him for free. The pale boy, Draco Malfoy, he named himself, and offered the name the way you'd offer a password, had the specific carriage of a person who had been told his whole life that he mattered and had never once been given cause to doubt it. And under that carriage, if you knew where to look, and Harry did, was a boy checking every face in the room to see whether the mattering held. He put out a hand. "You'll soon find out some wizarding families are better than others, Potter. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort. I can help you there." Harry looked at the hand. It was a clean hand, a cared-for hand, and there was nothing wrong with it except everything behind it, and Harry had spent 10 years learning the difference between people who wanted him and people who wanted the use of him. "I think I can tell the wrong sort for myself, thanks," he said pleasantly, and did not take the hand. Something crossed Malfoy's face that was there and gone, and the 2 larger boys shifted, and for a moment the compartment had a weather in it. Then Malfoy withdrew the hand he had never quite meant, and said something about hoping Harry wouldn't end up like his parents, and left, and the door banged, and Ron let out a breath he'd been holding. "That was Malfoy," he said, and somehow the name explained a season. Harry filed the name, and the chin, and the checking, and the 2 boys who stood like furniture, and thought that he had just made his first choice at Hogwarts, and that it had been at least his own. The stone in his chest was quiet. It was always quietest when he was paying attention to other people. He'd never noticed that before. He noticed it now and had no idea why now, and the answer, though he could not have known it, was that England was full of old magic, and the train was carrying him deeper into it by the minute, and something inside him that had been asleep for 10 years was beginning, very slightly, to stir against the weight that held it down. They came to the castle by boat, across a lake black as spilled ink, and Hogwarts rose up out of the dark with every window lit, and for a moment nobody in any of the little boats said anything at all. Harry looked at it and felt the stone in his chest turn over, not fear. He knew fear the way you know a room you've lived in. This was the opposite of the stone being heavy. This was the stone being awake. The castle was pouring something into the night, a pressure he had no name for, and it went through his skin and found the sunken thing inside him and pressed, gently, the way you press a bruise to see if it's healing or getting worse. "You all right?" Ron whispered. "Fine," Harry said, which was a word he'd said 10,000 times and meant twice. The doors were tall enough to admit weather. Beyond them a stern witch in green named Professor McGonagall told them what would happen and did not soften it, which Harry respected, and then she left them penned in a small side chamber to wait, and the waiting was its own trial. 40 children in too small a room. Neville had lost his toad again and kept patting his pockets on the chance it had come back by post. A knot of them near the front were reciting facts at one another, defending against the unknown the only way any of them knew how. Harry stood near the back with his shoulder to the cold stone and did what he always did in a new place, which was take its measurements, and the measurement the room gave back was strange. The castle was leaning on him. He could not have described it better than that then. There was a pressure in the stone at his shoulder, the way there is a pressure in a doorway when a storm is coming that you feel in your teeth before you hear the wind. It came up out of the floor and in through the wall, and it found the sunken place in his chest and settled against it, patient, enormous, like a tide arriving against a levee that has held so long everyone has forgotten it is a levee at all. He put his hand flat to the wall without deciding to. The stone was warm. Stone should not be warm. Somewhere above and around and beneath him something was awake and old beyond reckoning, and it had noticed him, the way a sleeping dog notices when a particular person enters a house, and Harry took his hand off the wall and made his face ordinary and told himself it was nerves. It was not nerves. But he did not have the words yet, and the words were coming, and they were only minutes away now, and then they were in the great hall under a ceiling that was not a ceiling but a slice of the actual sky, stars and all, and 4 long tables of children who had already found out who they were watching, a small crowd of children who hadn't. On a stool at the front sat a hat. It was a disreputable hat, patched and creased, the sort of thing you'd use to frighten crows, and when a rip near its brim opened and it began to sing, Harry did not hear most of the song. He was watching the hat and feeling from all the way across the hall, the stone in his chest strain upward toward it like a compass needle finding north. The hat sorted magic. Harry didn't know that yet as a fact, but he could feel it as a shape. Every child who sat on the stool and let the hat down over their eyes was, for a moment, opened. And the thing inside Harry that had spent 10 years muffled behind a wall recognized, at last, something that could hear it through the wall. Potter, Harry, said Professor McGonagall. The whispering started before he'd taken 3 steps. He kept his eyes on the stool and his face on the setting labeled surprised like everyone else and sat, and the last thing he saw before the brim came down over his eyes was the staff table, and a very old wizard at the center of it with a long silver beard and half-moon glasses, watching him over steepled fingers with an expression of great and practiced warmth. Then the hat, then the dark. Then a voice in his head that was not the system, not yet, just the ancient patchwork intelligence of a 1,000-year-old artifact, saying, well now, it said again, slower, what is this? Harry felt it move through him the way you'd feel a hand move through water, and where the hand went, it stopped. He felt it find the wall. He felt it find the second wall behind the first, and the third behind the second, layer on layer on layer, and he felt the hat's cheerful curiosity cool into something careful. Someone said the Sorting Hat, and its voice had changed, has done a great deal to you, boy. A very great deal. 9 times if I'm counting the knots, and I have never in 1,000 years miscounted a knot. What? Harry thought, because you can talk to a hat if it's inside your head. What are you talking about? Layers, the hat said. Bindings, seals, laid one over another, the way you'd lag a pipe against frost. Someone has wrapped your magic in 9 coats and left you shivering and told you, I expect, that you were simply cold by nature. A pause. The hat's attention pressed against the outermost layer, testing it the way McGonagall's voice had tested the room. This is master's work. This is a lifetime of craft, and it is nailed shut over a child who does not even know the door is there. I don't understand. No, the hat agreed almost gently. That was the point. Someone wanted very badly for you not to, and then because the hat was old and proud and did not like finding chains on a child in a place that had promised for 1,000 years to teach children to be free, it did a thing it would not admit to later. It leaned its full ancient weight against the outermost seal, not to break it. The hat could not break Albus Dumbledore's work and would not have dared. But a hat that has read a million minds knows how to lane, and it lined, and the seal, which had been laid a year ago over 8 older seals and had been carrying their strain ever since, and which was already trembling from the pressure of an entire castle full of the oldest magic in Britain pouring in through the walls, took the line and held, and then, along one hairline fracture that no one had ever put there on purpose, quietly gave way. Harry felt it go. He felt it the way you'd feel a rope you didn't know you were tied to cut, and a voice that was not the hat said, out of the exact center of him in a tone as flat and clear as a struck bell, final lock broken. The hall did not change. That was the strange part, the part Harry would come back to for weeks. The candles went on floating. The children went on whispering. No thunder, no wind. The most important second of his life so far passed without a single other person in the room registering that it had happened, and Harry sat under a hat with his eyes closed and everything in him coming apart and reassembling around a new and enormous fact. The voice again unhurried. Capstone seal, Tier IX, released. Core Tier 1 online. Something opened. He had no better word for it then or after. It was as if he had lived his whole life breathing through a straw and had assumed that was breathing, that the tightness in his chest and the gray at the edges of his vision and the perpetual sense of running slightly behind was simply what it was to be alive. And then the straw was gone, and the first full breath went into him, and it did not stop, and it did not stop, and he understood with a lurch that he had never once in 10 years been full. The stone in his chest was not a stone. It had never been a stone, it was a well, and someone had put a lid on it, and the lid had just come off, and what came up out of the dark was not water. Warning, said the voice with what he would later learn was the closest it came to a joke. Unaccustomed throughput, recommend you do not set the table on fire. Harry, under the hat, thought with great precision, who are you? A pause. The sense, for the first of many times, of something turning to look at him that had not, until that instant, been sure he would ask. Undetermined, the voice said, I was asleep, you woke me by being alive in a loud place. Another pause, I am the part of you that keeps the BOOKS, there is a great deal to keep. Am I a wizard, Harry thought, or am I something else? And the voice, which he would come to trust precisely because it never once lied to make him feel better, said, yes. The Sorting Hat, meanwhile, had recovered its composure, which for a Sorting Hat means it went back to doing its job while pretending it had not just committed a small act of sabotage on the most powerful wizard in the country. They'll all want you now, it murmured, and Harry realized it could feel the voice too, or feel around the edges of it, the way you feel heat off a closed oven. Every house. Do you understand what I'm holding? No. Good. Neither do I entirely, and I have held Merlin. Here's what I know, boy, Slytherin would sharpen you. You have the mind for it, the patience, the habit of watching doors. You would go far and you would go alone. The hat's voice dropped, and for a moment it was not sorting, it was advising, which hats are not supposed to do. But you have been alone your whole life, and something tells me the next part of it is going to try very hard to make you believe you must stay that way. You will need people who would walk into fire for you before they knew there was a reason. You will need to be somewhere it is safe to be brave out loud. And where's that? Harry thought, the hat at the top of its voice so the whole hall could hear it. Gryffindor, the red and gold table came apart with noise. Harry pulled the hat off and the hall rushed back in at full volume and full light, and he walked to the cheering on legs that felt borrowed. and a pair of identical red-headed boys were chanting, "We got Potter," and Ron, being sorted 3 names later, dropped down beside him with an expression of pure relief, and Harry sat in the middle of more welcome than he had received in the previous decade combined and could not enjoy a second of it because he was busy holding the sky. That was the closest description. Something was pouring into him and he had to hold it, had to keep the level from cresting, and he had no training and no idea what he was doing, and the only instrument he had was the voice, which narrated his own interior to him like a comm engineer walking a nervous pilot through a landing. "Intake stabilizing," it said. "You are not drowning. You only feel that way because for 10 years you were issued a teaspoon." How do I stop it? Harry thought, gripping the edge of the bench. "You do not stop a tide," the voice said. "You learn the shape of the shore. Breathe. The core will find its own level. It is older at this than you are." He breathed. The voice was right. The pressure, which had felt like a burst pipe, was in fact a reservoir finding its natural line, and after a minute that stretched like taffy it did find it and settled, and Harry sat there hollowed out and refilled and entirely new, listening to Percy Weasley explain the point system while the whole of his understanding of himself quietly caught fire and burned to the ground. "I'm not broken," he thought. The idea was so large he had to approach it sideways. "I was never broken." I was. He reached for the word and the voice supplied it flat without editorial. "Contained. Someone did this to me. Yes, on purpose. The work is deliberate, layered, and skilled. It was not an accident, and IT was not a curse from an enemy. An enemy would have killed you. This was built to last and built to hide. Someone wanted you alive and small." Harry looked very slowly, without turning his head, as he'd learned to look at Vernon when Vernon was in a mood, up the length of the hall to the staff table, where the old wizard with the silver beard sat watching the new Gryffindors with his warm and practiced smile, and who, when Harry's eyes reached him, met them and inclined his head the smallest degree, in a gesture of welcome so gentle and so grandfatherly that Harry felt the last of his childhood go cold and still inside him. He did not know. He had no proof. He was an 11-year-old with a voice in his head, and a lifetime of learning not to accuse the powerful of anything. But he had also spent 10 years reading the faces of people who were kind to him in public and something else in private, and he knew the specific quality of a smile that is performing kindness rather than feeling it, and Albus Dumbledore's smile had that quality the way a coin has 2 faces, and Harry, who trusted his own eyes more than he trusted anyone's words, filed it, and this time he knew exactly why it needed filing. "Noted," said the voice which had felt him look and had felt what he felt and offered no argument. The feast arrived out of nothing, gold plates heaping themselves, and the Gryffindors fell on it, and Harry made himself eat because a body that has just come online needs feeding, and because eating gave his hands something to do that was not shaking. He was careful. That was his whole plan, the entirety of the strategy he'd assembled in 90 seconds under a hat. Be careful. Whoever had spent his childhood keeping him small had done it for a reason, and reasons like that do not evaporate because a hat got clumsy. If the wall was down, Harry did not want the person who'd built it to find out from across a room. He wanted to find out who they were, and why, and what they meant to do, before they knew there was anything to do it about. So he ate roast chicken and let Seamus Finnegan tell him about being half and half, and asked Ron 3 questions about Quidditch, and under the table, where no one could see, he ran an experiment. There was a candle guttering in the nearest floating candelabra, its flame small and blue and dying. Harry looked at it and thought, without a wand, without a word, as he used to think at the odd small things back when the odd small things happened to him through a wall. Up, the flame stood up, not a flicker. It rose off the wick a full inch, a clean blue lance, steady as a soldier, and held there, and Harry felt the cost of it leave him, and it was nothing, it was less than nothing. It was the amount of effort it takes to lift a spoon, and he let go, and the flame dropped back to its guttering, and no one at the table had seen a thing. "Skill observed, direct channeling unfocused," the voice said. "Rank novice. Note, every first year in this hall would require a wand, an incantation, and 6 weeks of practice to do what you just did with a thought and no idea what you were doing. Is that normal? No. Was it ever going to be normal? The voice took a moment. When it answered, there was something in it he had not heard before, a low note under the flatness, the sound of a machine reading a specification it found remarkable. "Operator," it said, "I do not yet know what you are. I know that 9 seals were laid over you, and that one has fallen, and that what came through the one is already more than the room around you holds among all of its 150 lives combined. There are 8 more, I can feel them. They are below us in the dark like floors of a building I have not been allowed to enter." A pause. "Whatever is at the bottom, someone was frightened enough of it to spend years and mastery making sure you never reached IT. I would like to know what frightens a master, would not you?" Harry, 11 years old, sitting in the warmest room he had ever been in, surrounded by children who did not yet know his name meant anything, looked down the hall at the smiling old wizard one more time and thought, with the clarity that would define the rest of his life, "Yes, I would." Dumbledore, for his part, was having a difficult evening, though not one visible face muscle betrayed it. He had felt the seal go. Of course he had felt it. He had laid 9 seals over the Potter child across 10 years, at intervals in secret, each one a small masterpiece of restraint, and he had keyed the outermost of them to himself the way a physician keys a monitor to a patient, so that if it ever weakened he would know. He had built it to give him decades of warning. A seal like that did not fail, it faded slowly over a lifetime, and he had planned to renew it long before it ever thinned, and he had planned in the fullness of time, when the war came round again and the terrible necessity arrived, to remove it himself in the right order, so the child would have exactly the power the prophecy required and not one grain more. He had not planned for a sorting hat with a conscience. He watched Harry Potter eat roast chicken and make careful small talk with Ron Weasley, and he watched Harry's hands stop shaking, and he watched the moment, brief, so brief a lesser observer would have missed it, when a dying candle in the nearest candelabra stood up straight for no reason at all and then sat back down. And Albus Dumbledore, who had done a great many things in his long life and told himself the truth about very few of them, understood that the timetable he had spent a decade building had just been set on fire, and that somewhere under the layers he had so carefully installed, a thing he had spent that decade praying he had judged correctly was beginning, ahead of every schedule, to wake up. I did this for you, he thought, watching Harry, and it was the sentence he had rehearsed for years, the one he intended to say when the day came, and for the first time it did not quite hold its shape in his mouth. I did this so that you might live long enough to matter. I did this so that when the choice came, it would be a choice and not a slaughter. He believed it. That was the thing about Albus Dumbledore that his enemies never grasped and his friends refused to look at directly. He believed his own reasons all the way down, and the belief did not make the reasons true, and somewhere in the oldest and coldest chamber of himself he knew the difference and had decided long ago that a man who intends to win a war cannot afford to live in that chamber. Minerva McGonagall beside him said quietly, "He's very like James." "Yes," said Dumbledore and smiled and did not say, "No, he's not like James at all. James was a bright ordinary flame in a world of candles. This is something the world has not seen in a very long time, and I have spent 10 years standing on the lid of it, and I have just felt the lid move." What he said aloud was, "Lemon drop, Minerva." The feast wound down. The plates cleaned themselves and vanished. Dumbledore rose to give the start of term notices, and Harry watched him as he'd have watched a snake in tall grass, and the notices were ordinary: a forbidden forest, a caretaker's list, a corridor on the 3rd floor that anyone who did not wish to die a very painful death was advised to avoid, and Harry filed the 3rd floor corridor without knowing why, except that men who smile like that do not mention painful deaths by accident. Then everyone stood to sing the school song, which was chaos, every child to their own tune, and in the noise and the standing and the scrape of 400 benches Harry, tired now, hollowed and refilled and running on the fumes of the most extraordinary hour of his life, made his one mistake of the evening. He looked up. He looked up at the ceiling that was the sky, at the false stars and the real dark behind them, and because he was tired his careful grip on himself slipped just slightly, and the second seal, which had been trembling since the first one fell the way a second domino trembles when the first one lands against it, cracked along its own hairline. It did not break, not that night, but it cracked, and through the crack, for one endless second, Harry Potter saw. The ceiling was not a slice of sky. He had known that distantly, the way you know a magic trick is a trick. What he had not known, what no one had told him because no one alive but the caster could have shown him, was what it actually was, and now he saw it, saw the thing itself and not the illusion draped over it, and the sight went into him like cold water and grandeur poured together. The ceiling was a working. A vast and ancient enchantment, layered by 10 centuries of hands, and it hung above the hall not as an image of the sky but as a lattice of intent, threads of light finer than spider silk and older than the country, crossed and knotted and singing to one another in frequencies just below sound, each thread a decision some long-dead witch or wizard had made and bound into the stone, so that it would go on being made forever. He saw the seams where one century's work had been grafted onto the last. He saw a repair high in the northeast corner, where something had torn the weave 300 years ago and a careful hand had woven it slightly wrong, and the wrongness had been singing quietly ever since, unnoticed, a single sour thread in a cord 1,000 years long, and it did not stop at the ceiling. The whole castle was made of this. He saw it now, the walls behind the walls, the wards laid into the foundations, the protections coiled around the towers, the countless small enchantments that heated the water and moved the stairs and kept the food coming and the cold out, thousands upon thousands of workings, layered and interlocked and burning quietly in the dark like the lit windows of a city seen from a great height, and over all of it, through all of it, an order, a structure. An architecture of pure intent so vast and so old and so beautiful that Harry Potter, who had spent his entire life being told in 100 small ways that he was less, sat in the middle of the oldest magic in Britain and understood for the space of one heartbeat that he could read it. Not use it, not yet, read it, see the shape of the thought behind the stone, see how it had been done and therefore in principle how it might be done again or done better or undone. Seal VII sensorium integrity failing, the voice said very softly, and under the flatness now there was unmistakably awe, the awe of an instrument reading a value it had not known the scale could reach. Operator, you are seeing the weave. Everyone can see this, Harry thought, dizzy, gripping the bench. Surely everyone. No, the voice said. No one can see this. One wizard in a generation sees a shadow of this and spends a life learning to see it worse than you are seeing it now. Exhausted, by accident, through a crack in the second of 9 doors. Do you understand me? The voice waited until it was sure he was listening. They did not seal a strong boy. They sealed this, whatever this is. And then Harry blinked and the tiredness took him, and his grip failed the other way, and the crack in the second seal held instead of widening, and the weave folded itself back behind the illusion of stars, and the ceiling was a ceiling again, ordinary night sky over an ordinary feast, and he was an ordinary boy gripping a bench too hard among children who were still murdering the school song in 400 different keys. But he had seen it. You cannot unsee a thing like that. He would sit through years of charms being taught the shapes he had already glimpsed whole, and he would remember every time the northeast corner of the ceiling in its one sour thread, and he would know that the ordinary version of the world he was being handed was a curtain, and that he had been born or made or both with the specific and dangerous gift of seeing behind it. Percy was herding first years toward the door. Ron was yawning wide enough to unhinge his jaw. Hermione, 3 places down, was already reciting the password to herself so she wouldn't forget it. The hall emptied in its warm, ordinary way, and Harry got up and went with it, one boy in a river of boys and girls flowing out under a false sky. At the staff table, Albus Dumbledore watched him go and did the arithmetic he had spent 10 years hoping never to do, and arrived at a number he did not like, and behind the half-moon glasses his eyes were not warm at all. He would need to see the child soon. Privately, he would need to take a very careful measurement, and if the measurement was what he feared, he would need to decide whether the outermost seal could be quietly renewed before Harry noticed it had ever been there. He had built these locks with love. He told himself that going up the moving stairs to his office, and he told himself that pouring a glass of something old and amber, and he told himself that standing at the window looking out over the grounds he had sworn to protect, and the trouble with telling yourself a thing so many times is that eventually you can no longer hear whether it is true. 9 seals, 1 gone. Harry did not know how many there had been. Let him not learn to count, thought the headmaster who had spent a decade teaching a nation's children to think for themselves, and he finished the amber and did not enjoy it. The common room, when the portrait hole let them through, was a warm red cave full of firelight and battered armchairs, and it should have undone him, the sheer comfort of it, the fact that he was being handed a place in it, a thing he had never once believed a person could simply be given. Ron collapsed into an armchair and declared it the best day of his life through a yawn. Hermione was already interrogating a boy about the moving staircases, and Harry stood a moment on the hearthrug and, because he could not help himself, ran one last quiet test. He did not touch the fire. He looked at it and asked, the way you'd ask a question in a language you had just discovered you spoke, what it was, and the fire answered, not in words, in structure. He felt the shape of the enchantment that kept it burning without fuel, an old and simple working laid into the grate by some long-gone hand, humble compared to the ceiling but the same alphabet, and he understood that if he wanted to he could reach into that shape and change one letter of it and make the fire burn blue or cold or in the shape of a running horse. He did not do it. Doing it would be seen. But he stood on the hearthrug of a house that had taken him in an hour ago and understood that the whole world was written in a hand he had been born able to read and had been kept all his life from a single page of. Restraint logged, the voice observed, dry. You could have made a horse of fire. You made a decision instead. That will matter more than the horse. He went up the spiral stair to the dormitory with the sentence turning over in him and found his trunk at the foot of a 4-poster and lay down. Up in Gryffindor Tower in that 4-poster bed with hangings the color of banked coals, Harry Potter lay awake a long time after Ron's breathing had gone slow and even. He was not afraid. He kept checking, the way you check a sore tooth with your tongue, and the fear was not there, and its absence was its own kind of strange. For 10 years fear had been the water he swam in. Now something else had moved into the space where it lived, and he lay in the dark taking the measure of it, and the voice lay quiet inside him, present, patient, keeping its books. Tell me what you know, Harry thought, all of it, small words. 9 seals, the voice said. 1 fallen tonight, 1 failing, 7 intact below that. Each one, when it falls, will give you back a piece of yourself that was taken. I cannot see what the pieces are until they come. I can see that they go down a long way. A pause. And I can see one thing more, which I will tell you because you asked for all of it. Tell me. The hand that laid these seals left itself in them. A master cannot help it. You cannot work that long and that close on a living soul without leaving your fingerprints on the inside of the doors. When they fall one by one, I believe we will learn not only what was taken. We will learn why, and we will learn, the voice said, and it was the flattest and the surest it had been all night. WHOSE fingerprints they are. THOUGH, I think, operator, that you have already guessed. Harry lay in the dark and thought about a smile with two faces and an old wizard mentioning a painful death by way of welcome, and he did not say the name, not even inside his own head, because some part of him older than 11 years knew that once you say a thing like that you cannot unsay it, and he wanted to be sure. He wanted above all things to be sure. He had been small his whole life on other people's say-so. He was not going to be large on his own, one at a time, he thought. We find out one at a time, we don't tell anyone, we don't do anything they can see, we just watch and we learn and we count. A sensible starting position, said the voice, and if a voice with no face could be said to approve of something, this one did. Good night, operator. Good night, Harry thought, to the part of himself that kept the books, and closed his eyes, and slept the first full tank sleep of his life, deep and dreamless and warm, while 8 doors waited in the dark below him, and 4 floors up, an old man stood at a window and watched the lights of his castle burn and wondered, for the first time in a very long time, whether he had been right. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The weave and the mimic. Harry woke before the others and lay still with his eyes shut, taking inventory, because a person who has learned to be small learns first of all to check the ground before he stands on it. The inventory came back wrong in every good way. He was warm all the way through, which had never happened, warmth being a thing the Dursleys rationed along with everything else. He was rested in a way that felt structural, as though someone had gone into him overnight and tightened every loose bolt. And underneath that quiet waiting level was the well, not a stone anymore, a depth. He could feel it the way you feel the size of a dark room by the sound of your own breath, and it was large, and it was calm, and it was his. Good morning, operator, said the voice. You slept 9 hours. Your core held its line through all of them. No spillage. You are learning the shore. You watch me sleep, Harry thought. I keep the books. The books do not close. He opened his eyes, and the crack in the second seal, which had held all night the way a bone holds a hairline fracture until the wrong step took the wrong step. It did not hurt. That was the astonishment of it. The first seal had come off like a rope cut, the second came off like a blindfold he had not known was tied, and the ordinary morning dormitory of Gryffindor Tower resolved, between one blink and the next, into something no first year had ever been permitted to see. He saw the wards first, because they were the loudest. They ran through the walls in seams of pale gold, old protective workings sunk into the stone by hands dead 600 years, and they hummed at a pitch under hearing. And where 2 of them crossed above the window they had been spliced together by a later, cleverer hand, and the splice was elegant, and Harry lay in bed reading 6 centuries of other people's decisions written into the room around him as plainly as a notice on a board. He could see which stones had been quarried with a charm still faintly clinging to them, and which mortar had been mixed by a witch who hummed while she worked, 300 years dead and her good mood still fossilized in the joints of the wall. The whole tower was a book, and every wizard who had ever touched it had signed a page. He saw Ron's wand on the nightstand, and around it faint a residue of use, the ghost shape of every spell it had thrown, guttering slowly the way a warm pan ticks as it cools. He could count them if he wanted. He could tell you the last thing Ron had cast in the clumsy, confident way he had cast it. He saw Neville's toad, finally recovered, asleep on Neville's chest, and around the toad a small knot of something wrong, a botched charm someone had once put on the creature and never cleaned up, snagged in its own loop, itching at the animal without ever quite doing anything. Harry looked at it and understood, without wanting to, exactly how to unpick it, the way you understand how to untie a knot the instant you can see both ends of the string. And he saw, when he turned his hand over and looked at his own wrist, the trace. Out on him like a fine chain no thicker than a thought, wound 3 times around, and where an ordinary wizarding child would have worn 1 strand of it, the standard ministry trace laid on every underage witch and wizard in Britain, Harry wore that one, and beneath it, wound tighter and older and keyed to a different hand entirely, 2 more. Seal VII sensorium released, the voice said, and there was that low note again, the note of an instrument reading past the end of its own scale. You now see magic as structure, WARDS, residue, bindings, intent. I will be honest with you, operator, because I promised I would. What you are doing right now, lying in bed, is a discipline that kills the wizards who try to learn it late in life. They call it mage sight and they spend DECADES and their eyesight chasing 1/10 of it. You are doing it before breakfast and it costs you nothing. There are 3, Harry thought, turning his wrist in the gray light, following the chains. 3 traces, not 1. The outer strand is the ministry's, every child wears it. It reports underage spell work. The other 2 are not the ministry's, they are older, FINER, and keyed to 1 person. They do not report what you cast. A pause, and the voice did the thing Harry would come to rely on, which was tell him the exact truth in the fewest words. They report where you are and what you feel. Someone has wanted for a long time to know the moment you began to be afraid. Harry lay very still and let that settle into him, cold and clarifying. He did not tear at the chains. You do not, he had learned young, kick a fence until you know what it is fencing and who is watching the gate. He looked at the two extra strands, and he memorized the shape of the hand that had tied them, the particular way it had knotted, the intent, unhurried, meticulous, kind in the manner of tucking a blanket over someone you intend to keep, and he thought, I have seen this handwriting before. On my own soul, last night, it is the same hand. Yes, said the voice before he had finished the thought. Can we cut them, Harry thought. Not yet. 2 of them are anchored below seals we have not reached. Tear them now, and he will feel the thread snap from wherever he is standing, and he will know you know. We leave them. We let H.I.M. watch a boy who is exactly as frightened as he expects. The best place to keep a secret operator is inside the story the other man is already telling himself. Ron stirred and grumbled and sat up with his hair at war with itself, and Harry pulled his sleeve down over his wrist and put on the face labeled Ordinary Morning and said, Sleep all right. And the day began. Breakfast in the great hall was 400 children and a ceiling doing weather, and Harry ate porridge and read the room, and the room had a great deal to say. The wards here were a cathedral of the ones upstairs. He could see them layered into the floor and the pillars and the high dark rafters, 1,000 years of protection stacked and interlocked, and he made himself look away from them the way you make yourself look away from the sun, because a boy staring transfixed at empty air was a boy who got noticed, and getting noticed was the one thing he could not yet afford. He practiced over porridge the discipline Hermione would later name for him. Look, understand, look away, keep your face ordinary. It was the same discipline that had kept him alive in a cupboard. He was good at it. He had a decade of training no wizard-born child could match, which was the training of a boy who had learned that seeing everything and showing nothing was the difference between a quiet night and a bad one. He let his eyes travel the staff table instead, casually over the rim of his cup. Most of the teachers wore nothing unusual to his new sight. Sprout was a comfortable green blur of growing magic, patient as compost. Flitwick sparked at the edges, precise and bright, a small master entirely at ease inside his own power. McGonagall was banked and formidable, controlled to the last inch, a bonfire keeping itself to the size of a candle out of sheer discipline. Snape, the pale one in black who had watched Harry through the whole of the feast the night before with an attention he hadn't understood, read as something knotted and defended, layer on layer of guard, a man who had built so many walls he'd forgotten which room he lived in. And then at the far end sat a young man in a purple turban with a nervous stammer Harry had already heard imitated twice in the corridors, Professor Quirrell, who taught defense, and around Professor Quirrell the air was wrong. Harry set his cup down. It was not a ward and it was not a residue, it was a wound. There was a second thing sharing the space where the professor sat, coiled close against the back of his skull under the turban, and it was thin and it was starving and it was old in the way that a scar is old, and when Harry's sight brushed against it, it moved. It turned toward him, not the professor, the thing. It turned the way a compass needle turns, and for half a second Harry felt it reach across the length of the hall and touch, very lightly, the place at the center of him where the well was, the place where, deep down under 6 unbroken seals, something answered. The well rang like a struck glass. Resonance detected, the voice said, and for the first time it was not calm. Disengage, look away. Now, Harry looked at his porridge. He counted to 10 in Latin, which was a thing Hermione had taught him the day before and which turned out to be surprisingly good for not screaming. The ringing faded. When he risked a glance back, the professor was fumbling a teacup and the thing behind his skull had gone still again, incurious, and Ron was saying something about the Chudley cannons, and the hall was just a hall. What was that, Harry thought, and his hands were steady, which surprised him, given the rest of him. I do not know, the voice said, and Harry believed it, because it had never yet pretended to know a thing it did not. But whatever shares that man, and whatever is sealed at the bottom of you, are made of the same material. They recognized each other like 2 notes an octave apart. File IT operator, do not go near IT, not until we have reached the bottom of you and know what we are holding. Harry filed it. He was by now keeping a very great many things in the drawer, and the drawer was getting heavy, and he did not yet know that the whole design of the year ahead would consist of that drawer, one item at a time, being opened. He also filed quietly a smaller fact. The wrongness behind Quirrell's skull and the 2 extra traces on his wrist and the seals in his soul were beginning to look less like 3 problems and more like one, seen from 3 sides. He did not know how yet. He only knew the shape of a thing that connects, the way you know from a single bone that there was once an animal. Transfiguration was McGonagall, and McGonagall did not waste the first lesson on a pep talk. She turned her desk into a pig and back to prove she could, and set them to turning a match into a needle, and told them it was difficult, and it was, for everyone in the room but one. Harry watched her do it, and that was the trouble. He saw the spell. Not the wand flick, though he saw that too, and not the incantation, though he heard it. He saw the working itself, the elegant compact instructions she pressed into the world, as she took the idea of match and the idea of needle and folded one into the other along a seam that already existed between them, a seam Harry had never suspected and now could not stop seeing. Everything, it turned out, was a little bit like everything else, and transfiguration was the art of finding the crease and pressing. It was beautiful. It was a small, perfect argument made in the grammar of the world. and the moment he saw it he understood it, the whole of it, the way you understand a joke, all at once or not at all. He put his wand to his match to be like everyone else and thought about not doing it well and did it well anyway. The match did not become a lumpy silverish match, which was the triumph the cleverest students were reaching for. It became a needle. A proper needle, steel bright, sharp, with an eye you could have threaded, and it rolled a half-inch across the desk and lay there being extremely, undeniably a needle in a room where 40 other matches were still resolutely matches. Skill observed, transfiguration, the voice said. Rank on first attempt, third-year equivalent. Note, you did not practice, you watched, and the watching was the practice. Harry looked at the needle. Then he looked, without moving his head, at the front of the room, where McGonagall was working her way down the rows, and he did the arithmetic he was getting fast at. A first year who turned a match into a flawless needle in 90 seconds was a first year who got remarked upon. Remarked upon went into reports. Reports went up a chain, and Harry had a very good idea now of who sat at the top of the chain, and he wanted, more than he wanted the small warm pride of the needle, to stay boring for as long as he possibly could. So he did a thing that cost him something, and he was aware of the cost even as he did it. He picked up the needle and he palmed it, and he pressed his wand to the place where it had been and muttered the incantation wrong on purpose, and produced a match that was slightly too silver at one end and pointed at the tip, the exact glorious failure of a promising beginner. And when McGonagall reached his desk she looked at it and her eyebrows went up a precise 2 millimeters and she said, "A good start, Mr. Potter. Focus on the shape," and moved on. He would remember later that this was the first lie he told at Hogwarts with his own magic, and that it was a lie about being less, and that he had told it to a good teacher who deserved better, and that he had learned to tell exactly this lie in a cupboard from a family who had wanted him small for reasons far uglier than Dumbledore's. It sat wrong in him. He noted that it sat wrong. He followed the wrongness with the rest, because a person who intends to survive a clever enemy cannot afford to spend his conscience early, and Harry meant to survive. Hermione, beside him, had produced a needle that was genuinely excellent, the best in the room by a mile among the students actually trying, and she was glowing about it, and she glanced at his silver-tipped match and then sharply at his face, and Harry felt himself be seen. Not caught, seen. She had watched him, and she had watched the match under his hand for the half-second it was a needle before it wasn't, and Hermione Granger did not yet have a theory, but she had a fact, and she was the kind of person who would not put a fact down until it told her everything it knew. That one is going to be a problem, the voice observed. Or an ally, the two often arrive in the same package. Charms was where the third seal fell, and it fell because Harry got interested, and getting interested, he was learning, was the one thing more dangerous to his careful invisibility than getting frightened. Flitwick was tiny and delighted and stood on a stack of books to see over his desk, and he was, Harry saw at once, a genuine master, the residue of his casting so clean and so economical that watching him work was like watching water find the one perfect path down a hill. He set them nothing that day but the theory of the levitation charm, Wingardium Leviosa, the swish and flick, the long O, and he demonstrated it on a feather, and the feather rose. Harry watched the working, and it was, again, immediately legible, a simple thing, a first-year thing, and he could have done it in his sleep. But Flitwick, warming to his subject, being the sort of teacher who could not resist showing a keen room one good thing beyond the syllabus, said, "Of course, the principal scales," and lifted not the feather but his own heavy oak lectern, and then his desk, and then, laughing at their faces, himself, a full-grown professor floating a yard off his stack of books, and the working he used to do it was not the first-year charm at all. It was a cousin of it, 4 years more sophisticated, a compound levitation that held mass and balance and fine control all at once, 3 separate intentions braided into one gesture, and it went past Harry's eyes in a single bright, unrepeatable instant. And the thing in Harry that had been sealed for the 3rd time reached out and caught it. He felt it happen. He felt the 7th seal, which had been trembling since transfiguration, the way a struck bell keeps a ghost of its note, take the incoming pattern and try to hold it out and fail. He felt the working of the professor's spell go into him and stay, complete, catalogued, filed not in the heavy drawer but in some deeper place that had just in that instant come online, and he understood with a lurch that he now knew how to do the thing Flitwick had just done, knew it as he knew his own name, knew it forever from having seen it once. Seal VII mimic, released, the voice said, and then quieter with the particular flatness it used for the things that mattered most. Up. You just learned a 4th-year spell by watching it one time. Understand what this is. You do not study magic, you copy IT. Anything you see performed, you can perform. The word for this among the people who would kill to have it is prodigy. The honest word is something else. What's the honest word, Harry thought, gripping the edge of his desk, feeling the 4th-year charm sitting warm and complete inside him next to the 3rd-year transfiguration, next to the mage site, next to the well. The voice did not answer that. Instead, for the first time, it gave him something new, and the newness of it stopped him where he sat, because when the 7th seal broke, it left something behind on the way out. A residue the voice had promised, a fingerprint, the mark of the hand that laid it, and now Harry got the first of them, and it was not information. It was a moment. It arrived the way a smell arrives, whole and instant and undeniable, someone else's memory pressed into the seal at the moment of its making and released now at the moment of its breaking. He was in a study lined with instruments that spun and hummed. He was old and tired, and his hands, long-fingered and careful, were moving over a sleeping child in a cot, laying and working down thread by thread. And he was thinking, the thought as clear as if it were Harry's own: a prodigy is a beacon. A prodigy is studied, courted, flattered, and in the end recruited by the first clever monster to reach him. I have watched it happen. I helped it happen once to a brilliant boy in an orphanage who charmed his teachers and frightened the other children, and I told myself he was only troubled, and I have spent a lifetime paying for the graves that boy dug. This one will grow up ordinary. Ordinary is survivable. Ordinary buys us time. Forgive me. Ordinary is a kind of mercy, and I have so little mercy left to give, and so much need of the time. Then it was gone, and Harry was in a charms classroom with a feather in front of him and a fourth-year spell inside him, and for the space of a breath, the whole shape of the thing he was up against. He had expected an enemy. He had prepared in the drawer of his mind for cruelty, for a captor, for a man who had made him small out of spite or fear or the ordinary appetite of the powerful for control. He had not prepared for this, for a hand that laid chains on a child and grieved while it did it, for a jailer who thought he was a shepherd, for mercy with a lock on it. That was worse somehow. He turned it over and found that it was worse. An enemy you could simply oppose. This asked something harder of him. This asked him to be right in the face of someone who was certain he was being kind, and to stay right even when the kindness looked from close up almost exactly like love. The hand is Albus Dumbledore's, the voice said unnecessarily, because Harry had known the shape of it since the porridge. And he is not lying to you, operator. That is the difficulty. He is lying to himself, and he believes it, and a man who believes his own kindness is the hardest kind of wall THRE is. You cannot argue HIM down. You can only grow past HIM and make sure that when you do, you have not become the thing he was afraid of. That second part is the whole game. Do not lose sight of it. Harry levitated his feather correctly, unremarkably, first year, the way everyone else was learning to, and got 10 points from a delighted Flitwick for a textbook swish and flick. And no one in the room knew that he had, 90 seconds earlier, quietly become the most gifted 11-year-old in the history of the school, and decided on the spot to hide it from the greatest wizard alive. Hermione cornered him in the library on the third day, which was faster than he'd expected and slower than she'd wanted. She did not open with an accusation, which he respected. She opened with a book. She sat down across from him, put a heavy volume between them, and said, "That match was a needle. For half a second, I saw the eye of it." She said it the way another child might have said, "I know what you did," except that Hermione Granger's version of a threat was simply the truth, laid on the table with the expectation that he would be reasonable about it. And in charms you got levitation on your first try like everyone else, but you were bored. You were bored, Harry. Nobody's bored their first week, so, she folded her hands. Either you've been practicing in secret your whole life, which doesn't fit because you were raised by muggles who hate magic, everyone knows the story, or something else is going on, and I would like to know which, because I don't like not knowing things, and I especially don't like not knowing things about people I've decided to be friends with. Harry looked at her for a moment. He had spent his whole life not telling people things, and the not telling had kept him alive, and here was a girl who had appointed herself his friend in the declarative mood, without asking, as she did everything, and every instinct he owned said file her, use her, tell her nothing. And underneath the instinct, quiet the well, and beside the well the voice, which said nothing at all, which left the choice pointedly to him. It had a habit of doing that at exactly the moments Harry most wanted to be told what to do, and he was beginning to understand that this was not the voice being unhelpful. It was the voice refusing, on principle, to be the hand on his scale that Dumbledore had been. It would tell him anything he asked and decide nothing for him. That, he was realizing, was the difference between a tool and a keeper. "If I tell you," Harry said slowly, "you can't write it down. You can't tell a teacher, and you especially can't tell the headmaster, and if you ever start a sentence with, 'We should really let Professor Dumbledore handle this,' I will know I made a mistake, and it will be a mistake I can't take back. Those are the terms. I'm not being dramatic. It's genuinely that serious." Hermione was quiet. He watched her want to argue that Dumbledore was the greatest wizard of the age and therefore obviously the person you told, and he watched her not argue it, because she had already in 3 days seen enough of how the world actually treated the person it called its savior, the staring, the whispering, the way grown adults leaned toward Harry like plants toward a window to have a doubt, and Hermione's doubts, once she had them, were as rigorous as her certainties. "All right," she said, "terms accepted. Now tell me, because I've read 4 books trying to explain you and none of them do, and it's driving me mad." So he told her, not all of it. He told her that his magic had been sealed, that it was coming back in stages, that he learned spells by seeing them, that someone powerful had done it to him as a child, and he did not yet know the whole why. He did not tell her about the well's true depth, or the thing behind Quirrell's skull, or the fingerprints, or the voice, because some doors he was not ready to open even to an ally, and because a good ally is one you protect from the parts of your problem that could get her killed. Hermione listened as she read completely, and at the end she sat back and said, "Okay, then you need a cover, and it needs to be better than a bad match. If you keep failing on purpose, you'll be inconsistent, and inconsistent gets noticed faster than good. You should be good, just human good. Top of the year, sure, that's allowed, that's just being clever. Nobody seals a child for being clever, but never fast, never bored. And you practice with me so that when someone asks how you're so good, the answer is he studies constantly with Hermione Granger in the library, which everyone will believe because, and here something crossed her face that was almost not quite a joke. It will be true, I'm going to make it true, I have a schedule." Harry looked at her and at the schedule she was already pulling out of her bag, actually already written, color-coded with his name on it, and something in his chest that had been clenched since he was old enough to clench it let go by one notch. "Deal," he said. "Ally then," said the voice, dry and he thought approving. "You chose well, she is right about the cover, she is right about most things. This will be intermittently unbearable and consistently useful. Note also, operator, that you have just done the first thing tonight that Dumbledore did not predict. He sealed you alone. He did not plan for you to have help that he could not see. Keep her out of his sight and SHE is worth a seal." The cover took, the way good lies do, by being mostly true. Within a fortnight the story of Harry Potter had settled into a shape the castle found comfortable. He was clever, everyone agreed, top of the year in most things, but that was only sense, wasn't it? The Potter boy studying morning and night in the library with the Granger girl who'd read the whole shelf twice, the two of them, and the Weasley boy who tagged along and made them laugh, and it turned out, saw around corners in a way the other two didn't. Ron never knew the real reason for the library hours, and Harry found he minded that less than he expected, because Ron gave him something the other two arrangements could not, which was ordinary company that wanted nothing from him and cost nothing to keep. Ron thought Harry was brilliant and slightly mad and reliably good in a corner, and treated him accordingly, and never once looked at him the way the adults did, like a door they were waiting to open. On the nights the drawer got too heavy, it was Ron's company Harry sought out, a game of wizard chess played badly and cheerfully, and the weight would come off by a pound or two without a single word about seals. He learned to lose at chess convincingly, which Hermione, when she worked out he was doing it, found more suspicious than winning would have been. "You throw games," she said over a library table low. "You could beat him and you don't. He needs to win at something," Harry said. "He's got 5 brothers. Let him have the board." Hermione looked at him for a long moment, and something reassembled behind her eyes, and she went back to her book without saying what it was. But she stopped testing him after that mostly and started, without quite announcing it, to guard him, which is a thing certain people do the instant they decide you are worth the trouble. The summons came on the 9th day, on a slip of parchment that appeared beside his plate at breakfast in green ink. "Harry, I would be glad of your company this evening. My office is behind the gargoyle on the 7th floor. The password is Sherbet Lemon. Warmly, Professor Dumbledore." Harry read it twice and did not let his face do anything, and Ron read it over his shoulder and was impressed, and Hermione read it and went pale and then, catching herself, made her face into something ordinary, which was not her gift the way it was his. He's going to try something, Harry thought, walking the corridors that evening, past suits of armor whose small guarding charms he could now see purring in their joints. He's had 9 days. He felt the first seal go. He's watched me be careful, and he can't work out how careful, and it's making him nervous, and a nervous man who thinks he has a duty is the most dangerous kind. He's going to take a measurement tonight, and if he doesn't like the measurement, he's going to try to put something back. "Almost certainly," the voice agreed. "Here is what you will do. You will let HIM. You will not resist. Resistance he could feel, and what he cannot measure he will learn to fear, and a frightened Dumbledore is a Dumbledore who acts. You will be exactly as small as he hopes. Let HIM right on the surface of you. I will hold the DPTHS dark. He will come away believing the lid is still ON. And you and I will know exactly what he tried to do, down to the thread." The gargoyle stepped aside. The spiral stair carried him up. And the office, when the door opened, was the single most beautiful and terrifying room Harry had ever entered, not because of any menace in it, but because of what his new sight made of it. A chamber crowded with silver instruments, each one a working of exquisite subtlety. Portraits that were themselves enchantments layered 100 deep. A bird of living fire on a golden perch whose whole being read, to Harry's eyes, as a single sustained note of impossibly old magic, and behind the desk, rising with a smile of such warmth that Harry could not find the seam in it, and that frightened him more than a sneer would have, Albus Dumbledore. "Harry," said Dumbledore, and made the name sound like a gift he was glad to give. "Sit, please. Lemon drop. No, a wise abstention. They are an acquired vice. I confess I only wish to see how you're settling in. The first weeks can be a great deal for a boy who comes to us from outside our world." It's a lot to take in, sir, Harry said, and made his eyes wide and let his voice have the small, careful eagerness of an ordinary lonely child before an important kind old man. And it was the best acting he had ever done, and it was easy, because he had watched grown adults lie to him his whole life, and he had learned their whole grammar from the receiving end. They talked. Dumbledore was very good. He asked about the Dursleys with exactly the right note of gentle concern, and about Harry's classes with exactly the right note of grandfatherly pride, and he steered, so lightly Harry would have missed it a fortnight ago, toward the topic of how Harry's magic felt, whether it came easily, whether he ever felt, perhaps, that there was more of it than he quite knew what to do with. And all the while, under the table, under the tea, under the kind blue eyes, Harry's sight showed him the truth of the room, which was that a working was building in the air between them, slow and patient and skilled beyond anything Harry could yet match, reaching for the surface of his mind. He had felt something like it before. He understood now that he had felt it 100 times in 100 small drab moments of his childhood, the gentle pressure that had turned down the volume every time the odd things threatened to get interesting. This was the same hand. This was the mercy with a lock on it, reaching to check the lock. External right attempt detected, the voice said, calm as a clock. Intent, a light suppression charm keyed to damp accidental magic and soften curiosity, not the old seals. He cannot remake those in a teacup. This is a patch, a thumb on the scale to keep you manageable while he decides what you are. Shall I let it land? Let it land, Harry thought, meeting the kind blue eyes, letting the working settle over the top of him like a hand over a candle. Let him think it took. Show me what it says, and the voice showed him. It let the suppression charm land on the outermost surface of Harry's mind, and it held the well dark and still beneath, and it read the charm as it settled, translated the old man's intent into words Harry could hold. Be smaller, be slower, be less curious about the corridor on the 3rd floor, be a good boy, trust me. Harry let his shoulders round the smallest degree, let his eyes go a little vaguer, let the eager questions he'd been half-forming die on his tongue, gave a perfect small performance of a curiosity being gently smoothed away. And across the desk Albus Dumbledore, watching him with a century of skill, saw the child settle, saw the 2 bright edges go soft, felt the working take, and something in his face eased that Harry filed forever because it was relief, and relief is the tell of a man who is more afraid than he is letting on. Well, said Dumbledore, warm, tired, and Harry thought briefly and genuinely fond, which was the worst part. I think you will do very well here, Harry, very well indeed. Off to bed. And Harry, do stay clear of that 3rd floor corridor. Some things in this castle are older than good sense, and I should hate to lose you before we have properly met. Before we have properly met, Harry thought, small and soft and vague on the outside, very still and very awake underneath. You've been meeting me since I was 1 year old. You've met more of me than I have. That's the whole problem, isn't it? Yes, sir, he said aloud, and got up and went, and did not let the performance drop until the gargoyle had closed behind him, and the stair had carried him down, and he was alone in a dark corridor with the suits of armor purring in their joints. Then he straightened. He straightened all the way up, the round shoulders and the vague eyes and the smooth curiosity dropping off him like a coat, and underneath, dark and level and entirely undamped, the well. The charm is inert, the voice reported. It never touched the core. He believes he has quieted you for a month, perhaps 2. He will not look closely again until ITFADES. We have bought time, operator, and we have learned the thing that matters most, which is that he is still doing it, not 10 years ago, tonight. He put his hand on you tonight and tried to make you less, and he called it settling in, and he felt relief when he thought IT worked. Sealing is not a thing that was done to you and finished. It is a thing that is being done to you. It has a present tense. A pause. How many locks did the hack count, operator? 9, Harry thought. And how many have fallen? 3. The capstone, the sight, the mimic. LOCKS remaining 6, the voice said. 6 doors, operator, and behind each one a piece of you he decided you could not be trusted to hold. We will open them 1 AT a time. We will not tell HIM. And when the last one opens, we will have the whole of what he took, and the whole of WHY, and then, operator, then you will get to decide what kind of person does with that much power what you are about to be able to do. Harry stood in the dark a long moment, an 11-year-old with the best mind in the castle and 6 doors below him and a color-coded schedule in his bag, and he was not afraid, and he was not yet angry, though he could feel the anger the way you feel whether coming, banked and patient and his to use when the time came. He had spent his whole childhood being made small by people who told him it was for his own good, and he had believed in the cupboard that the world outside the cupboard would be different. It had turned out that the greatest wizard alive had built him a larger, kinder, better-lit cupboard and called it protection, and grieved as he turned the key. Harry found that he could hold that fact without breaking, and that holding it made him feel, for the first time, entirely his own size. One at a time, he said aloud to the empty corridor, to the part of himself that kept the books. And he went to bed and slept full, and in a tower 4 floors up an old man sat among his humming silver instruments, believing he had bought himself a quiet month, and did not know that the quiet was the sound of a much larger thing deciding, very carefully, exactly when to make its noise. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Deep well by the middle of October, Harry had learned to be exactly as good as Hermione had prescribed, which turned out to be the hardest magic he did all term. Being brilliant would have been easy. Being convincingly, consistently, human good, top of the year and no higher, never fast, never bored, cost him a small continuous effort that ran under everything else the way a held note runs under a song. He rationed his correctness. He got the second best mark on the charms essay on purpose because Hermione had the best, and 2 firsts from the same table was a pattern, and patterns went into reports. He raised his hand a beat late. He asked now and then a question he already knew the answer to, and chose it carefully so the answer would be a small, honest lie about the size of him. It was exhausting in a way no one could see, and it was the only exhaustion he had left because his body no longer got tired the way it used to, and he was beginning to understand that the effort of pretending to have limits was going to be, for the rest of his life, the largest limit he had. At night, though, when the dormitory had gone to the deep, even breathing of boys who did not carry a drawer, he stopped pretending and went looking for the bottom of himself. He never found it. That was the thing about the well that he could not get used to. He would lie in the dark and pour, quietly, carefully, a controlled draw of power down and down into some private test, holding a soundless light behind his closed eyes, spinning it brighter, feeding it, waiting for the tiredness that told an ordinary wizard he had reached his edge. The tiredness did not come. He fed the light until it was a small sun behind his eyes and he could have read by it through his own skull, and there was no strain, no floor, no far wall, only more, opening below the more, and he would let the light go and lie there with his heart going at its ordinary walking pace and understand that he had barely dipped a cup into it. "You are testing the wrong thing," the voice said one night, watching him do it. "You keep looking for the bottom of what you can spend." That is the capstone tier, what came back with the first seal. Throughput, how fast the water comes through the pipe. It is already more than any wizard in this castle commands, and it is not the thing you cannot find the bottom of. Then what is, Harry thought, the reservoir, the 6th seal, how much there is to spend before the pipe runs dry? That one is still shut, operator. What you have been dipping your cup into is the overflow above a door that has not opened. The thing beneath it is not large. Large is a word for things that have edges. The voice paused, and there was that low note again, the note of an instrument being asked to measure the sky. "I have been trying to estimate IT since the sorting. I cannot. Every model I build, ITEXCDS. I will tell you honestly that this frightens me, and I am the part of you that does not frighten." Harry lay in the dark and turned that over, and did not test the light again that night, and slept, and did not dream, because he had not yet learned that the not dreaming was itself a thing someone had arranged. Potions was in the dungeons, and Potions was Severus Snape, and Severus Snape had disliked Harry on sight in a way that was too specific to be about a first year. Harry read it the first lesson and filed it. The dislike was old. It had a shape that predated Harry entirely, grief worn into a groove and mistaken, for years, for hatred, and it pointed at Harry because Harry had his father's jaw and his mother's eyes, and Snape had lost something to both of them that he had never set down. Harry watched the wizard's guard, layer on layer of it, the most defended mind he had seen outside Dumbledore's office, and understood that here was a person who had suffered and had decided long ago to make the suffering into armor and wear it pointed outward, and Harry felt something for him that was not quite pity and was not fear, and had no plans to let it show. "Potter," said Snape on the 3rd week in the silky voice he used for drawing blood. "Perhaps you can tell the class why we add the powdered root before the infusion and not after." It was a 5th-year question dressed as a trap. Hermione's hand was in the air. Harry looked at his cauldron and gave the answer a promising, hard-working first year would give. 3/4 right. The last quarter fumbled in a way that was plausible, and watched Snape's mouth thin, because Snape had wanted either triumphant ignorance he could punish or suspicious brilliance he could report, and had been handed instead a boring competent child, and boring competent children gave him nothing to do. But Snape was not Dumbledore, and Snape's suspicion ran on a different fuel. He did not think Harry was powerful. He thought Harry was arrogant, coasting, a pampered celebrity hiding laziness behind a quiet face, and midway through the lesson, bending over Harry's cauldron to sneer at his admittedly perfect potion, Snape did a thing that Dumbledore had done gently and that Snape did like a man flicking a knife. He pushed hard and fast at the surface of Harry's mind. A jab of legilimency, quick, contemptuous, expecting to find a lazy child's shallow thoughts and rummage them for insolence. He found a wall. He found a wall that had not been there a second before and should not have existed at all. A flat blank refusal where a first year's open thoughts should have been, and the wall was not the practiced discipline of an accumens which Snape would have recognized and respected. Cruder than that and stranger, a door slammed by pure reflex, and behind it, for the half-instant before it closed, Snape felt not the small warm clutter of a boy's mind but a cold enormous depth, a pressure with no floor, a thing that turned toward his intrusion the way deep water turns toward a dropped stone. Snape straightened up very fast. Crude occlusion successful, the voice reported, dry. You slammed the door before I could. Untrained, ungraceful, and he felt more than we wanted. Noted, he will not know what he felt. He will only know it was wrong. Harry looked up at Snape with an ordinary child's mild confusion, rubbing his temple as though he'd caught a chill, and said, "Sir, did I do something wrong?" in a voice with nothing in it, and Snape stared at him for a long moment with an expression Harry had not seen on him before, which was uncertainty, and then swept away without assigning a detention, which for Snape was the equivalent of fleeing. That night Harry knew without being told a report would go up the chain. Not the report Dumbledore was watching for, the report of a powerful child, a stranger one. There is something behind the Potter boy's eyes that pushed back, and I do not know what it was, and I did not like it. And Dumbledore, who trusted Snape's instincts about darkness more than he trusted almost anything, would file it and would begin quietly to wonder whether his quiet month had been quiet at all. We made him look, Harry thought, walking up out of the dungeons. That was a mistake. Yes, the voice agreed, but an instructive one. You cannot plan around every blade. Some of them you will only meet by being cut. What matters is that you bled less than he did. File it and walk. Defense against the dark arts was the one class Harry had been dreading, and he had been right to. Quirrell's classroom smelled of garlic and fear, and the professor stammered his way through a lesson on hinkapunks that a bright child could have taught better, and Harry sat in the back with his sight lidded down to almost nothing, because the thing behind the turban was awake the whole hour and Harry did not want it awake and looking at him. He got through most of the lesson by keeping his eyes on his parchment and his mind on the powder-droot lie he was constructing for Snape, and it nearly worked. Then Quirrell came down the aisle to collect the essays and paused at Harry's desk, and the wrongness leaned out. It was very quiet and very close, and it did the thing it had done at the feast, reached the short distance now between the turban and Harry's chair and touched, delicately, the sealed dark at the bottom of him, and the well answered before Harry could stop it. One low note struck against another an octave down, a chord neither of them had asked for. For a heartbeat the two of them sat inside it, the starving old thing behind the professor's skull and the vast young thing behind the child's ribs, recognizing each other, and Harry felt, coming off the wrongness, not hunger exactly but a terrible, curious patience, the attention of something that had all the time in the world and had just found in a first-year classroom a scent it had been missing for 10 years. Disengage, the voice said, sharp. Drop the sight entirely. Geo deaf to it, now. Harry dropped his sight to black, blind as any ordinary child, and picked up his quill and asked Quirrell in a small, bright, helpful voice whether hinkapunks were examinable, and the professor blinked, and the wrongness withdrew, baffled and incurious again, and the moment closed. But Harry walked out of that classroom knowing two new things, and he turned them over all the way up the stairs. The first was that the thing behind Quirrell did not know what Harry was, only that Harry tasted of something it wanted. The second was worse. The cord had not frightened the well. The well had leaned toward the wrongness the way iron leans toward a magnet, comfortable, familiar, glad, and Harry did not know yet why a piece of him should be glad to meet a monster, and he understood that the answer to that was probably behind one of the doors still shut in the dark of him, and that he was not going to like it. File it, said the voice, and for once it did not have anything dry to add. He and Hermione had been researching, in the careful hours the schedule allowed, and what they were researching was Harry, not the seals. She still did not have the name for the hand, and he had not given it. But he had told her enough about the fingerprint in the charms room, the study and the cot and the sleeping child, that Hermione had gone at the problem as she went at everything, which was through the library, and between them they had assembled, over 3 weeks of stolen afternoons, a picture of Harry Potter's childhood that neither of them liked. Blood wards, Hermione said low, over a table barricaded with books in the quiet stacks where Madame Pince didn't patrol. That's what your fingerprint was, the hedges, the doorframe. It's very old magic and it's real and it's genuinely protective, which is the annoying part. If your mother died to save you and you were placed with a blood relative, the sacrifice can be anchored into the home. While you can call it home, nothing that means you harm can touch you there. That's not a cage, Harry. That's the strongest shield there is. It's both, Harry said. That's what I keep trying to make you see. He built a real shield. And he wound a leash through it so fine you'd never find it unless you could see magic as thread, and the leash isn't protective at all. The leash is what kept me small. You can do 2 things with one working. He did. He tapped the book. What I want to know is who was watching. A shield you set and forget. A leash you have to check. Somebody was checking. That was where Mrs. Figg came in, and it was Ron, of all people, who cracked it, wandering past their table and glancing at Harry's list of privet drive facts and saying idly, "Old cat lady watched you, you said. Loads of cats, smelled of cabbage, never let you have fun, mate, that's a squib, obviously. Muggles don't keep 9 cats and know exactly when to send you home. That's a watcher. Everyone's town has one. Mum was one for a bit." And he wandered off toward the Quidditch section, having demolished a mystery Hermione had 4 books open on, and Hermione stared after him with the particular outrage of a scholar shown up by a boy who had never once done the reading. "He's right," she said, wounded. "He's completely right. How is he right?" "Because he grew up inside it," Harry said, "and we're reading about it from outside. He looked at his list, a blood-warded house he could never quite bear to leave. A squib on the corner reporting his movements, 2 extra traces on his wrist that told a distant hand where he was, and worse, when he began to be afraid. He had thought as a small child that the specific airless smallness of his life was an accident of unlucky relatives. He was looking now at an architecture, deliberate, patient, expensive, built by a mind that missed nothing, and every beam of it had been labeled in the builder's own hand for his protection. There's a version of this, Hermione said slowly, watching his face, where whoever did it really was only trying to keep you safe. Blood wards, a watcher, keeping you out of the papers. It reads as protection because a lot of it is protection. I know, Harry said. That's the version he believes. I've seen him believe it. He closed the book. The trouble with that version is the leash. You don't need to make a child weak to keep him safe in a warded house. You make a child weak so that if the wards ever fail, he still can't leave. Safety keeps the wolves out. The leash keeps the sheep in. He did both, and he'll only ever talk to you about the first one, and he isn't lying when he does, and that is the single most dangerous thing about him. Hermione looked at him across the barricade of books, and Harry watched her arrive finally all the way at the thing he'd been carrying alone and watched her decide to help him carry it. And neither of them said anything about the name because they both already knew it, and saying it in a library felt like lighting a match in a room full of gas. They practiced in an unused classroom on the 4th floor twice a week, behind a door Harry had taught himself to convince, and the practice was the best hours of his week. Hermione set the curriculum because Hermione set all curricula, and the curriculum was 2 things braided together. The first was the cover, Harry learning, at a believable human pace, the spells a top first year ought to have, so that his public magic would have a visible history behind it, drills she could swear to if anyone ever asked how the Potter boy got so good. Second was the real work, and the real work was Harry finding out what the unlocked doors had actually given him, in a room where being seen didn't matter, with a witness he trusted, and it was here, over those weeks, that his rapid rise stopped being a private terror and started being a thing he could steer. The mimic he tested first because it was the strangest. Hermione would read him the wand movement and theory of a spell from a book, and it would do nothing. The mimic did not learn from pages. Then she would perform it badly, a shaky first attempt, and Harry would watch, and the working would go into him whole, and he would do it back perfectly on the first try, better than the demonstration, understanding it as he understood a joke. They ran up the years like a staircase, 2nd year disarming, 3rd year silencing. By November he had watched Hermione fumble her way through spells 4 years above them and given them back to her flawless, and she had stopped being frightened by it and started in her way to love it, because Hermione Granger had spent her life being the girl who worked hardest, and here was proof, sitting across a table from her, that the universe was not fair and never had been, and somehow, being on the inside of the unfairness instead of its target had reconciled her to it. Not that you don't have to work, she told him once, watching him hold a perfect shield charm he'd copied off her 90 seconds earlier. You still have to see it done. That's a limit. That's a real limit. If nobody in the world can do a thing, you can't copy it because there's nothing to copy. Which means, and here she smiled the smile she saved for a conclusion she liked, the one kind of magic you can't steal is the kind nobody's invented yet. Everything already known you'll own in an afternoon. Everything not yet known you'll have to make. She has just described the floor and the ceiling of you in 2 sentences, the voice observed with something close to respect. Remember the second one, operator. The day is coming when the only move on the board is one no one has ever made, and on that day the mimic is useless and you will find out what is underneath it. Harry did not know it yet, but he was learning, in that borrowed classroom, the one skill the seals had never managed to take, which was not power. It was judgment. Every unlocked layer arrived as raw capacity, a flood with no banks, and it was Hermione, unknowing, drilling him on spells and making him show his working and refusing to be impressed by anything but control, who taught him to put banks on the flood. She thought she was helping him fake being ordinary. She was teaching him to be trusted with being extraordinary, which is a rarer and more useful lesson, and it was the reason that when the doors below finally opened all the way, the thing that came up was steerable and had somewhere to steer and knew the difference between could and should. Dumbledore had spent a decade making sure Harry stayed too weak to be dangerous. Hermione, in 8 weeks, was quietly making sure that when he stopped being weak, he would not be dangerous either, and she did it without ever once being told what she was doing, and that, the voice noted privately in its endless books, was worth more than any seal Albus Dumbledore had ever laid. Halloween arrived with a feast of 1,000 carved pumpkins floating in the enchanted dark, and bats, and the whole hall bright and loud, and Harry was reaching for a roast potato when his sight, which he had learned to keep half-lidded in crowds, snagged on something moving through the castle that should not have been moving. He felt it before Quirrell burst through the doors. He felt the wards downstairs flex, a whole section of the castle's ancient protection bending around a mass of dumb, hungry magic that had been let in, not broken in, let in, a door held open from the inside, and he traced the holding open back along its residue to a signature he had been carefully not looking at for 6 weeks, the wrongness that lived behind a purple turban. Then the doors banged wide and Quirrell came sprinting up the hall with his turban askew, shrieking about a troll in the dungeons, and fainted more or less gracefully at the foot of the staff table. The hall went to chaos. Dumbledore's voice cut through it, sending prefects to shepherd houses to dormitories, and Harry stood with the rest of Gryffindor and let himself be herded, and thought, fast and cold, the way the drawer had taught him to think when the room turned dangerous. Troll doesn't open a warded door. Someone opened it and put the troll through and then ran up here to announce it, which means the troll isn't the point. The troll is the noise you make so everyone looks left while you go right. He found Quirrell's fainted shape at the staff table with his sight, and under the theatrical swoon the wrongness was awake and coiled and unfrightened, and it was facing very deliberately away from the dungeons, toward the stairs that led up, toward the 3rd floor. He's using it as a diversion. He's going for the corridor, the one Dumbledore warned me off. There's something up there worth a troll. He had half a plan for that, filed it, and then Ron, beside him, said the thing that stopped Harry's blood, which was, "Where's Hermione?" She had not been at the feast. Harry knew exactly where she was because he had watched her leave in tears after Ron, being 11 and thoughtless, had said something cruel about her that had gotten back to her, and she had gone to cry in a bathroom the way girls that age went to cry in bathrooms, and the bathroom she had gone to was on the ground floor near the dungeons, directly in the path of a mountain troll that no one had told her about. Harry did not decide to go. Deciding implies a gap between the fact and the moving, and there was no gap. He simply stopped being where the prefect wanted him and started being in the corridor, Ron scrambling after him, and the two of them ran down through a castle emptying the wrong way, against the tide, toward the smell. They reached the bathroom the same moment the troll did, and there was no more time for planning after that, only the doing. The troll was 12 feet of gray muscle and stench, a club the size of Ron dragging from one fist, and it had smashed through the door and cornered Hermione against the far wall among the broken sinks, and she was doing the thing that keeps clever people alive, which is going very still and very quiet while her mind ran, and it was not going to be enough because the club was already lifting. Ron threw a tap at its head and missed. It did not miss Hermione. Harry crossed the room. He would try later to explain to himself what he did, and the words never fit because the words were for wizards and he had stopped in that half-second, being only a wizard. He reached for the well, not the overflow he tested at night, not the cup, but the whole of what he could spend, and he threw a hand out and caught the club, not with his hand, with the well. A wall of pure restraint bloomed in the air between the troll and Hermione, a working with no incantation and no wand, the raw idea of stop pressed into the world as he had pressed it at 7 against 3 boys by a bike shed, except that at 7 a hand had reached in and turned the volume down, and now there was no hand and no volume, and the club came down and struck the stop, and the stop held. The troll hit it again. It held. A 3rd time, and the shock of it ran up Harry's arm into his teeth, and the demand of holding a 12-foot troll off a wall of will was enormous, was more than the overflow above the 6th seal could supply, was a draw so far past anything the throughput alone could feed that the pipe screamed for water, and the water was not there, was behind a door, and the door, under a demand it had been built to make impossible, cracked, then broke. Sylvie, the voice began, and for once it did not finish the sentence in Harry's ear, because there was no room in him for anything but what came up. The reservoir opened. It came the way the sea comes into a harbor at the turn of the tide, not fast, not violent, simply total, a vast, slow, unstoppable filling that had been waiting behind the 6th door for 10 years and now had somewhere to go. Harry stood in a wrecked bathroom with his hand outstretched and felt the true size of himself arrive underneath him. And it was not a size, the voice had been right, it had no edges. It went down past where down had meaning, a depth beneath the well, and the small, enormous demand of holding a troll, which had nearly emptied his overflow, drew on the reservoir and did not lower it by a measurable amount, the way a thimble does not lower a lake. And for one endless instant, standing in the flood of it, Harry understood the shape of the thing they had sealed, not its size, which had no shape, but its nature, and the nature of it was this: that the world's magic ran through wizards the way a river runs through a wheel, turning them a little as it passed, and that Harry did not turn to let the river through. The river turned for him. He was not a wheel in the current. He was a place the current had decided at the bottom of him to become. He did not kill the troll. He wanted that noted later in the private ledger he kept of who he was becoming, that even in the first flood of a power with no bottom, the thing he reached for was not the killing. He took the club out of its fist, gently, the way you take a dangerous toy from a large, stupid child, floating it up out of reach. He wrapped the stop around the whole of the creature, arms and legs and dull, furious head, and he squeezed the idea closed until the troll stood locked and swaying and blinking in the middle of the room, held in a fist of pure intent, unable to move so much as a finger. And then, because a bound troll would starve or panic and either way suffer, and because he found he could reach into the dumb flicker of its mind as he had reached into the fire in the common room, He pressed sleep into it softly, and the troll's eyes rolled up, and he lowered 12 feet of gray muscle to the floor as carefully as you'd lay down a sleeping horse, and it began hugely to snore. The whole thing had taken perhaps 12 seconds. "Sylvie reservoir released," the voice said, and its voice was very quiet and very steady, the steadiness of a thing holding itself together on purpose. "Operator, I no longer have a number for you. I want you to understand that as precisely as I can say it. It is not that the number is large. It is that the instrument has no units for what it is reading. You will not tire, do you hear me? In any fight that is decided by who runs out first, you have already won against anyone before it begins." And then, on the way out of the broken door, the sixth fingerprint. It came like the others, whole and instant. He was old, and it was night, and he was walking the boundary of a small, ordinary house on a small, ordinary street, laying a working into the hedges and the doorframe, and the working was two things at once, a protection and a leash, blood magic to keep the child safe inside, and a subtler binding to keep the child's own strength low enough that he could never, whatever happened in that house, gather the power to simply walk out. And the thought, clear and terrible and sad, he must not be strong enough to run. Not from them, not from me, not from the road. A child who can run will run, and a child who runs dies or worse is found. He must stay small enough to stay put. I am so sorry. I am building you a cage because I cannot build you a world. Then it was gone, and Harry stood in a wrecked bathroom with a sleeping troll and a white-faced Hermione and a Ron who had stopped being able to speak, and understood that the wizard who had capped his power at 7 had done it in part so that a boy in a cupboard would never have enough magic in him to save himself. That was the one, of all of them so far, that he would carry. The teachers came at a run, McGonagall first, robes and fury, then Snape limping oddly, then Quirrell wringing his hands, and the tableau they found stopped all three of them at the door. A troll, unconscious, unbloodied, laid out with an almost tender neatness on the flooded floor, its club floating gently, a foot above its chest, turning, 3 first years unharmed. And no sign anywhere in the room of the kind of desperate, blasted violence that a troll actually killed by, no scorch, no rubble beyond the door it had smashed itself, nothing but a 12-foot monster put carefully to sleep like a difficult toddler. "What," said Professor McGonagall, "happened here?" And Hermione Granger, who had never told a lie to a teacher in her life, told one cleanly before Harry had to. "It was my fault, Professor. I thought I could deal with the troll. I've read about them. I was wrong. Harry and Ron came to find me, and Ron knocked its club away, and it fell and hit its head on a sink and knocked itself out. I'm so sorry. I've been very stupid. It was a terrible lie. The troll was plainly not lying where a fall would have put it. But it was told with the total conviction of a rule follower confessing a crime, and it was the kind of lie adults want to believe because the truth is worse. And McGonagall, looking at 3 alive children and 1 alive troll, chose visibly to take the lie, docking Hermione 5 points and awarding the boys 5 each, and sending them all upstairs with her voice shaking in the particular way of a teacher who has just imagined a funeral. But Snape did not take the lie. Harry felt Snape's eyes on him the whole time, on the floating club, on the sleeping troll, on the impossible gentleness of the scene, and Snape's face, when Harry glanced at it, was not suspicious anymore. It was afraid. Snape had felt the wall in the dungeons 3 weeks ago and had not known what he felt. And now he was standing in a room where a mountain troll had been disarmed and anesthetized by 3 11-year-olds without a mark on anyone. And Harry watched the 2 facts click together behind the wizard's black eyes into a single conclusion he did not have the shape for yet, and watched him decide, as Dumbledore's man, to carry that conclusion straight up the moving stairs. And Harry noticed one thing more, the thing that mattered most. Snape's leg was bleeding under his robe, a bite, a big dog's bite, and the blood had the residue of the 3rd-floor wards on it, which meant that while a troll roamed the dungeons and a school looked down, Severus Snape had gone up to the corridor to get between whatever lived there and the wizard in the turban. Snape was not the one going for the door. Snape was the one guarding it. "He will tell Dumbledore that something is wrong with you," the voice said as they climbed, "and he will be unable to say what. And Dumbledore will believe him because Dumbledore already knows what Snape cannot name. The quiet month is over, operator. From tonight he is watching again. We will have to be faster and better, and we will have to choose soon whether we keep hiding or whether we stop." Not yet, Harry thought. 3 seals left that we can open quietly. Stop hiding when we have to and not a day before. Agreed, for now. Hermione did not go to bed. She followed Harry and Ron up to the common room, which had emptied to embers, and she sat down in the armchair across from him and looked at him with her whole formidable attention, and Ron, sensing a conversation above his security clearance and being whatever else not stupid about people, mumbled something and took himself off to the dormitory, and then it was the 2 of them and the fire. "That wasn't in the seals you told me about," Hermione said. Her voice was very even, which was how he knew she was frightened. "You didn't slam a troll into a wall with a spell you copied. There was no spell. I was watching. You put your hand out in the air, said no. What was that?" "That was the 6th one," Harry said. He was too tired in the ordinary human way, the way of a boy who had run down 4 flights and watched his friend nearly die, to manage her as he managed everyone else, and he found he did not want to. There were 9, Hermione, 9 seals. I told you 3. Tonight the 6th came off. It's not a spell. It's how much I've got. And the answer, as far as anyone can measure, is that there isn't an answer. Hermione absorbed that as she absorbed everything completely, and then asked the question that made her worth more than a seal, which was not how powerful are you but who did it and why 9 and why you, and Harry, watching the fire, told her the shape of it. Not the name still, but the shape. A powerful person, a decade of work, a cage built out of love and fear, a boy kept small enough to stay put. And a thing tonight that had shown him a memory that was not his, a hand in a hedge, a thought, he must not be strong enough to run. Hermione was quiet for a long time. Then she said in a small, hard voice, I want to know who thinks a child should be too weak to run away from a house where he's unhappy. I want their name, and I want it to be someone I can hate, because right now it's just a shape and I can't hate a shape. And I need to hate someone about this, Harry, because otherwise I'm going to cry, and I've cried enough today. Harry looked at his friend, who had lied to teacher for him and nearly died in a bathroom and was now offering, without being asked, to carry a piece of the weight, and he made a decision he had not planned to make, which was to trust her with a little more. I'll tell you when I'm sure, he said. I'm close to sure. But once I say it out loud, it's real and it stops being a thing I can be wrong about, and I've spent my whole life being told what was true by people who turned out to be lying, so I'm going to be sure first. That's not me not trusting you. That's me not trusting the world. There's a difference. Hermione looked at him and something in her face settled, and she nodded once and did not push, which was, from Hermione Granger, an act of love. LOCKS remaining, 5, the voice said into the quiet as the fire ticked down. 3 open since the sorting by MY count and 5 still below. And one thing more, operator, which I have been waiting for a quiet moment to say. The troll was a diversion. You saw it. Someone went up to the 3rd floor tonight while the castle looked down. Whatever is behind that door, the thing with 2 faces wants it, and the thing with 2 faces is made of the same material as the bottom of you. These are not 2 stories. I have suspected it since the feast, and now I am nearly certain. The seals and the corridor and the man behind the turban. 1 story, 3 doors. We are opening them all at once, whether we meant to or not. Harry sat by the dying fire with his impossible depth quiet and level beneath him and his friend asleep now in her chair, and he did not test the light that night because he no longer needed to know how much there was. He knew there was enough. There would always, from tonight, be enough. What he needed to know now was a harder thing, the thing the voice had put to him after the troll and would keep putting to him until it was answered, which was what a person who could never be worn down, never be outlasted, never be made to run out, ought to do with a world full of people who could. He carried the fingerprint up to bed with him, the hand in the hedge, the thought about running, and he lay in the dark holding it and did not sleep for a long while. And when he finally did, it was the first night since the sorting that he dreamed, and the dream was of a small, ordinary street seen from above, and a boy asleep in a cupboard under a stair, and an old kind hand moving along the hedges in the dark, tucking him in, locking him down, saying sorry, saying sorry, saying sorry. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, Aegis and Edge. November went to December, and the castle turned inward against the cold, and Harry Potter learned that being watched again was a different weather to live in than being watched the first time. The first time Dumbledore had watched a mystery, now he watched a worry, and a worried Dumbledore was a busy one. McGonagall began, in a manner that was meant to look like ordinary head-of-house attentiveness, to check on Harry twice a week, asking after his health and his happiness with a genuine kindness that Harry found harder to fend off than any interrogation, because Minerva McGonagall did not perform her concern the way the headmaster performed his, and Harry had to keep reminding himself that a good woman can be a good man's instrument without either of them being false. He gave her a happy, settled, slightly homesick child, which was true enough at the edges to hold, and she reported upward that the Potter boy seemed well, and Dumbledore, 4 floors up, read the report and did not believe it, because Snape had told him a thing he could not unhear, and Snape was never wrong about the specific cold that came off a mind with something terrible in it. Harry felt the machine of the school begin, very gently, to close around him, and he made himself grow at exactly the pace that would keep it from tightening. It was the hardest game he played all term, harder than the mage sight, harder than the occlumency he was teaching himself in crude nightly increments, because the machine was made of decent people, and decent people are the most difficult thing in the world to deceive without becoming something you don't want to be. He gave McGonagall a homesick boy. He gave Flitwick a diligent one. He gave the common room a slightly reckless flyer with 2 good friends and a talent for losing at chess, and every one of those boys was a lie told with a fragment of the truth, and Harry kept a private tally of the fragments he spent, because he had promised himself, in the ledger of who he was becoming, that he would never lose track of how many true things he had turned into camouflage. He had made the Quidditch team, which had not been the plan. A first year did not make the team, but he had caught a thrown remembrall out of a 50-foot dive in his first flying lesson, on pure unsealed reflex before he thought to hide it, and McGonagall had seen, and there was no unseeing a dive like that. He had let it happen because refusing would have been stranger than accepting, and because a boy who was merely a freakishly good flyer was a much safer boy to be than a boy who was freakishly good at everything, and Harry had learned to spend his exposures where they cost him least. So he was the youngest seeker in a century, and the whole school knew his name for a reason that had nothing to do with the thing he was hiding, and he found that he did not mind it, that flying was the one place the drawer went quiet, that 100 feet up with the wind taking the noise away he could stop managing anyone at all, including himself. "You like it," the voice observed the first time as he came out of a practice dive with his ears streaming. "Noted, you do not like many things out loud." "File this one under keep," filed Harry thought and meant it, and it was, in a term of secrets, one of the very few things he was glad to have on the record. He had begun to notice that the voice collected these, the small unguarded gladnesses, and filed them somewhere separate from the tactics and the fingerprints and the count of the doors, and he had begun to suspect that the voice did this on purpose, was building him a private ledger of reasons, against the day the power came fully online and he would need to remember hard and specifically what a human life had felt like from the inside. A river remembering that it was once a spring. The thing behind Quirrell's turban had stopped being incurious. Harry felt the change across 3 weeks, the way you feel a season turn. At the feast in September, the wrongness had brushed him and moved on, a compass swinging past north. By December, it was hunting him. It had worked out in its patient, starving way that the scent it wanted lived in the small, black-haired first year, and it had begun to arrange to be near him, a corridor here, a doorway there, Quirrell appearing with a stammered pleasantry at the edges of Harry's days more often than chance allowed, and each time the wrongness leaned out and tasted the sealed dark at the bottom of Harry and went away hungrier. "You have to stop reacting to it," Hermione said low in the library because she noticed everything, that Harry went still and colorless whenever Quirrell entered a room. "Whatever it is, you go strange, and it's the strange that draws attention. I've been watching you not watch him for a month, and if I've clocked it, Snape's clocked it, and Snape reports to the one person we don't want doing arithmetic about you." "It's the same material as the thing at the bottom of me," Harry said, because he had decided after the troll to stop keeping the load entirely to himself, and because saying the frightening things out loud to Hermione had turned out to make them smaller instead of larger, which was the opposite of what a decade in a cupboard had taught him to expect. "When it gets close, part of me wants to answer, not the part I control, the deep part, it reaches for it like family. And I don't know what that makes me, and I'm not going to know until the last door's open, and until then I have to sit next to a monster twice a week and pretend a piece of me isn't glad to see it." Hermione was quiet. Then she said practically, which was her love in its working clothes, "Then we make the pretending a skill instead of a strain. You're brilliant at faces. You're rubbish at faces when that thing is in the room because it's the one thing that frightens you. So we drill it like everything else. I'll be the monster. I'll come at you across a table 40 times until your face learns to lie about it without you." And she did over the following week, an 11-year-old girl playing at being an ancient hunger for an hour at a time so that her friend's terror would develop calluses, and it worked more or less, and it was one of the kindest things anyone had ever done for him, and neither of them ever called it that. Ron, who was not told the reason for any of it, contributed in his own way, which was to loathe Quirrell loudly and simply on the grounds that his classroom smelled and his lessons were useless, and to say so at every meal, and Harry discovered that Ron's ordinary contempt was a better shield than any of Hermione's drills, because it is very hard to sit in dread of a man while your best friend is doing an unkind and accurate impression of his stammer under his breath at breakfast. The three of them together were a machine Dumbledore had not planned for, and its output was that Harry, at the center of it, was harder to read every week, held steady by a girl's rigor and a boy's nonsense in roughly equal measure. Dumbledore summoned him again the week before the holidays, and this time there were no lemon drops. Harry knew the visit was different before he reached the gargoyle, because the whole of the 7th-floor corridor had been prepared. His sight showed it to him, a working laid into the air of the office ahead, subtle and vast and patient, not a teacup patch this time but something built over days, a great soft net of persuasion woven through the room itself, keyed to trip the instant Harry crossed the threshold. It was beautiful, the way the ceiling of the great hall was beautiful, a master's work, and its intent when Harry read it from the corridor was written plainly in its threads: "Trust me. Love me a little. Believe that I am good and that whatever you have begun to suspect is a misunderstanding. Stay away from the 3rd floor and please be reachable." "He has decided." The patch failed, the voice said. "This is the stronger measure, a loyalty working, not a chain, a current to steer you back toward H.I.M. before you drift where he cannot follow. He is not doing this to hurt you, operator. I will say that plainly because you will need it in a moment." He is doing it because he is afraid he is losing you, and he has never in his long life believed that losing a weapon and losing a child were different things. A pause. Shall I hold it off? Can you? I can, but hear me. The last 2 times we let him right on the surface and kept the deep dark. This working is too fine for that. It will not sit on the surface. It reaches for the core, and the core has spent 4 months waking up, and I do not think this time that it will lie still and let itself be steered. If I let this touch the core, I do not know what the core will do. It may break a door, it may break it loudly. Harry stood at the foot of the moving stair and did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic came out the way it had been coming out all term, which was that he was tired of being written on. Let it reach, he thought. I'm done letting him steer me. If the core answers, the core answers. I'll manage the noise. Understood, said the voice, and there was something in it that Harry had not heard before, a kind of grim satisfaction, the sound of a machine that had been waiting a long time for its operator to stop flinching. He climbed the stair. The door opened. The office was warm and golden and crowded with its impossible instruments, and the bird of living fire watched him from its perch with an ancient patient eye, and Albus Dumbledore rose from behind the desk with his terrible warm smile, and the net of persuasion dropped over the room and closed, soft as snow, reaching past the surface of Harry's mind toward the sealed dark at the center of him with 100 fine and loving hands. And the core woke all the way up and refused. It was not violence. Harry would hold to that afterward in the ledger of who he was becoming. Even cornered, even reached for, the thing at the bottom of him did not lash, it rejected. The loyalty working came down toward the core like a hand toward a still pond, and the core did the thing a still pond does to a hand, which is to remain exactly itself and let the hand find, at the place it expected, to close on something soft, only depth and cold and its own reflection. The persuasion reached the core, and the core did not resist it and did not accept it. It metabolized it. It took the working apart into its component intentions the way water takes apart a fistful of salt, unmade trust me and love me and be reachable into their bare grammar, and dissolved them and gave back nothing and was not moved by the width of a hair. Seal v. Aegis released, the voice said, into the sudden ringing quiet of Harry's skull. He felt it settle into him like armor forged to fit. The fifth door, the warden, and what came up through it was not a weapon but a refusal made permanent. From this instant, no working aimed at his mind or his will or his memory would land unless he chose to let it. Compulsions would slide off. Loyalty charms would dissolve. A hostile hand in his thoughts would find deep water and a reflection. He had spent his whole life being written on at the Dursleys at Privet Drive in this very office twice, and the fifth seal falling meant that the writing was over, that the surface of him was his now down to the floor, and the relief of it was so large and so total that he had to hold his face very still against it while across the desk Albus Dumbledore's loving working came apart into nothing and vanished, and the headmaster's smile for one bare instant slipped. He felt it fail. Of course he did. He had woven it over 3 days and keyed it to himself, and he felt it reach the child and dissolve like sugar in rain, and Harry watched 100 years of certainty stumble behind the blue eyes, watched Albus Dumbledore understand, in the space of one failed working, that he had lost the ability to steer the child he had spent a decade building to be steerable. And the fifth fingerprint came, in the middle of the ruined spell, whole and instant. He was younger in this one, not so old, standing in a ministry corridor arguing with someone Harry could not see, and the thought behind his eyes was hard and clear and had none of the sorrow of the others. He must remain reachable. Whatever else I take from the child, I cannot take that. A weapon I cannot aim is no use to me and a danger to everyone. He must trust me at the last, or the whole design fails. I will make him strong enough to win and no stronger, and I will keep always a hand on the reins, because the day is coming when I will need to send him toward his death, and a boy who trusts you will walk toward it, and a boy who does not will have to be pushed, and I have never yet found a way to push a person that did not cost me the person. Then it was gone, and Harry sat in a golden office across from a suddenly uncertain old man, and understood the fifth truth, that he had been kept not only small and not only weak but reachable on purpose, so that at the end he could be aimed, and that the aiming had a target, and the target was somewhere out past the edge of everything he had learned so far, and it was called his death. He did not let his face know it. He asked in a mild, homesick voice whether he could go home for Christmas, and Dumbledore, gathering himself with the speed of a very great wizard, said of course, and something kind about the Dursleys that they both knew was a lie, and Harry left the office having lost nothing and learned everything. And behind him the headmaster sat very still among his instruments and began, for the first time, to be genuinely afraid of the thing he had spent 10 years building a cage around, and worse. To suspect that the cage had been the thing teaching it to want out. The Quidditch match against Slytherin was on the last Saturday of term, and it was where the fourth seal fell, 100 feet up in front of the entire school. Harry should not have been surprised that the attempt came there. The whole castle would be watching the sky and no one watching the stands. A seeker in a dive was a boy who could die of an ordinary accident. It was, if you were a starving patient thing behind a turban, the cleanest possible place to reach for what you wanted and blame the broom. He felt it start 4 minutes in, while he circled high above the game looking for the snitch. A working reached up from the stands and closed around his broom, a jinx laid on with a jerking, muttering, continuous will, and it was not elegant like Dumbledore's. It was crude and vicious and strong, and it took hold of the broom under him and began, methodically, to try to shake him off into a 100-foot fall. The broom bucked, it rolled. It tried to throw him, and Harry, who could have snapped the jinx in an instant, held on with his knees and did nothing, because his mind was moving faster than the broom, running the arithmetic of exposure even as the ground pulled at him. He could break the jinx wandlessly and be seen doing wandless magic. He could reach for his wand, which was up his sleeve and would take both hands, which he did not have, one being welded to a bucking broom. He could let the drama play out the way such dramas were meant to, a jinxed broom, a near fall, a lucky recovery, the story writing itself. But the working tightened and the broom stood on its end, and for one bad second Harry hung over 100 feet of empty air by the grip of one hand and understood that the thing behind the turban did not want a near miss. It wanted him dead or nearly, wanted his body broken enough to be examined, wanted, above all, to see what came out of him when he stopped being able to hold it in. So Harry stopped holding it in. He let go of the broom with both hands. He was not on the broom anymore in any way that mattered. He was in the air, 100 feet up, falling, and he reached without a wand and without a word into the hole of the well and told the world, as he had told a candle up in a troll's stop, one flat sovereign thing: no, the fall stopped. He hung in the air over the pitch, unsupported, unbroomed, a first year floating in a clear December sky by nothing anyone could see, for a single endless second, and in that second the fourth door blew open with a sound like a cathedral bell, and the whole architecture of him rang. This was the ascension kind of moment, the kind the ordinary words were built too small to hold, and Harry felt the magic stop being something he shaped with a wand and a word and a gesture and become simply the same substance as his wanting, so that between the desire and the deed there was no longer any distance at all, no incantation to speak, no focus to raise, nothing between the sovereign no and the obedient sky but the width of a thought, which is to say nothing. Is to say that Harry Potter had, in the space of a heartbeat and 100 feet, become a spell that walked around wearing a boy. Seal Ivy Edge released, the voice said, and the words came braided into grandeur because even the voice could not keep the awe out of it. WNDLSS, wordless. The magic answers the intent with nothing in between. Operator, there is no longer any object in the world they can take from you to make you harmless. The wand was the last handle on you. It is gone, you are the spell now. For that 1 second the sky belonged to him. He felt the crude jinx still clamped on the fallen broom below, and he unmade it with a thought, dissolved it back into the frightened will that had cast it. And he traced that will to its source in the stands and found exactly where he had known he would find it. The wrongness behind Quirrell, straining, muttering, and for one bright terrible instant across 100 feet of winter, ere the two of them looked at each other with everything unhidden, the ancient hunger and the child who was not falling. And the wrongness recoiled from what it saw, because it had reached for a scent and found, looking back at it, an ocean. Then Harry remembered where he was and who was watching, and he grabbed the broom out of the air as it tumbled past him and swung a leg over it and made the whole impossible thing look, to 400 screaming spectators, like the luckiest catch in the history of the school, a boy who had been thrown and had somehow got his broom back and had somehow not died. He even caught the snitch on the way down, closing his ordinary human hand around it a foot above the grass, because a hero who caught the snitch was a story the crowd already knew how to tell, and a story they knew how to tell was a story that would never, ever get close to the truth. The crowd went out of its mind. Gryffindor won. No one in all that noise had seen a boy hang motionless in an empty sky. No one but 3 people, a white-faced Hermione in the stands, who had watched the whole of it through her fingers and would not sleep that night. A stammering professor with a starving thing behind his skull, who now knew, past any doubt, that the Potter boy was the thing it had been looking for. And Severus Snape, who had spent the entire match muttering a steadying counterjinx at Harry's broom under the impression that he was saving the child's life, and who had felt his counterjinx become suddenly, completely unnecessary, and had lowered his wand and stared at the sky with an expression that had gone all the way past fear into something colder and more certain. And the 4th fingerprint, delivered even here, even now, mid-triumph: a wand can always be taken. That is the whole mercy of the wand, that it can be removed, that a wizard disarmed is a wizard you can reason with or contain, or if it comes to it, spare. A wandless mage cannot be disarmed, cannot be contained, cannot be safely opposed. I will let him have a wand and never teach him he does not need one. The day he learns he does not need it is the day I lose the last safe way to stop him. Let that day come as late as it possibly can. It came today, Harry thought, a foot above the grass with the snitch buzzing in his fist and the crowd roaring his name, and he understood that the last safe way to stop him was gone, and that Dumbledore did not yet know it, and that the not knowing was, for a few more days, the only advantage Harry had left. Hermione found him behind the changing rooms afterward, away from the crowd, and she did not congratulate him. "You let go of the broom," she said. Her voice had the flatness she used when she was too frightened to be shrill. "On purpose. You let yourself fall so you'd have a reason to do the thing you didn't want anyone to see, and then you dressed it up as luck. You could have died to protect the secret, Harry. You could have died." "I couldn't have died," Harry said gently, because she deserved gentleness and because it was true. "That's the thing you don't have yet, and I do. I can't fall. The ground is a suggestion now. I know how that sounds. I'm telling you so you'll stop being frightened of the wrong thing." He sat down on an overturned crate, and she sat beside him, and he told her the two seals that had fallen this week, the Warden and the Edge, resistance and wandlessness, and what they meant, which was that no one could steer his mind anymore, and no one could take his power by taking his wand, and that between them they had closed the last two doors by which a person could have controlled him from outside. "That's 3 left," Hermione said, doing the arithmetic because she always did the arithmetic. "You said 9, 6 down, 3 left, Harry agreed. "And I think," he stopped and started again because he had promised her he would say it when he was sure, and after this week he was sure. "The name, Hermione, you wanted a name so you'd have someone to hate, I'm sure now. I've seen him do it 3 times with my own eyes, the last time an hour before that match. It's Dumbledore. It was always Dumbledore. He sealed me 9 times because a prophecy told him I'd have to die to end a war, and he needed me strong enough to be the weapon and weak enough to be aimed and trusting enough to walk toward the ending when he pointed at it. That's the whole of it. That's what the doors have been telling me, one fingerprint at a time. He's not evil. That's what makes it unbearable. He loves me the exact amount a general loves a good soldier he's already decided to spend." Hermione was silent for a long moment. Then she took his hand, which she had never done, and held it and said, "Then we're not going to let him spend you." And it was not a strategy, and it was not a plan, and it was the truest thing anyone had said to him in his life. And Harry, who had one named emotion left in him for the whole of that terrible bright term, let himself feel, for exactly as long as her hand was in his, something that was almost happiness, and then he put it carefully away because there was work to do. He went home to Privet Drive for Christmas, and it was the strangest journey of his life, because he went back to the smallest place he had ever lived carrying the largest thing anyone had ever carried, and because now, at last, he could see the house. The Dursleys were exactly as he had left them, which is to say they treated him as a burglar they were legally required to feed, and Harry moved through the 3 days of it with a serenity that unsettled them more than any defiance would have, because a boy who is not afraid of you is a boy you no longer own, and Vernon and Petunia felt the ownership go without being able to name it. But Harry was not paying much attention to the Dursleys. He was looking at the house. His mage sight, 4 months matured, showed him Privet Drive the way it truly was, and it stopped him on the front path the first evening, his breath fogging in the cold, staring at the ordinary pebble-dashed semi as at a cathedral. The blood wards were everywhere, and they were, the voice had been right, genuinely beautiful and genuinely protective. An old and mighty magic anchored in the sacrifice of a woman Harry could not remember, wound through the brick and the hedges in the very doorstep, and while they held, nothing in the world that meant him harm could cross the threshold. He stood in his mother's protection, made visible, and felt, for a moment, unbearably held. And then he saw the other thing, wound through it, exactly as he had known he would, because he had felt the same handwriting on his own soul. The leash. Finer than the wards, keyed to a different hand, laid over the protection like a second layer of frost, and its purpose was not to keep harm out but to keep strength down. A slow, patient binding that had reached into the house's warded quiet and for 10 years had turned the volume down on the child who slept in the cupboard under the stairs every time he grew loud enough to notice himself. Harry stood on the path and traced the leash with his sight back to its anchor, and the anchor was in the doorframe of the cupboard, right where his head had rested on 10,000 nights, and he understood, standing in the cold, that the smallness of his childhood had not been metaphor. It had been magic. He had been kept small by a working he had slept beneath since he was 1 year old, and every muffled odd thing, every unfindable edge of his own power, every heavy stone in his chest had come out of that doorframe, laid there by a kind old hand that had wanted, more than it had wanted anything, for the child to be too weak to run. He could have unmade it. He stood there knowing exactly how, the whole of the leash legible to him, undoable with a thought. He did not. He left it, and he left the wards, and he went inside and ate his small allotted dinner, because unmaking the leash now would tear the wards with it, and the wards were his mother, and he was not, whatever else the year had made him, willing to unmake his mother to spite the wizard who had hidden a chain inside her love. He would leave it standing. He would walk out from under it on his own, upright, when the time came, and let it fall behind him the way you let a door fall behind you without slamming it, because slamming it would have meant it still had power over him, and it did not anymore, not since a sorting hat with a conscience had leaned on a capstone in a bright loud hall 4 months and a lifetime ago. You could have taken it down, the voice observed, quiet, as he lay that night in a bedroom that had once been a cupboard. You chose not to. I am filing this one, operator, in the ledger of reasons. The day you have all 9 doors open and the whole of yourself in your hands, you will want to remember that there was a night you held a chain you hated and left it standing because pulling it down would have cost you the one thing in IT that was love. That is the whole difference between you and the thing he was afraid you would become. Hold on to it. Filed Harry thought in the dark in the smallest room in England and slept, and did not dream of the hedges that night because he had finally seen them with his eyes open, and a thing seen with open eyes stops being able to visit you in the dark. For floors in a country away in a tower full of instruments, Albus Dumbledore was doing his own arithmetic and arriving at his own answers, and the answers were worse than Harry's because Dumbledore had more to lose. He had felt the loyalty working fail. He had watched through a dozen small silver instruments keyed to the Potter boy's magic across 10 years, needles he had trusted for a decade to tell him the child's strength, and every one of those needles had spent the autumn climbing off its dial and had, this week, gone still at the top of its arc, pinned, useless, reading a value the instrument had never been built to hold. He had sent Severus to watch the match, and Severus had come to him afterward gray-faced and said a sentence Dumbledore had been dreading in his bones for 4 months. He did not need saving. I tried to save him and the trying became pointless in my hand. Headmaster, the child hung in the air with no broom and no wand and no word, and the thing that hangs a body in the air with no broom and no wand and no word is not a talented child. I have only felt that absence of effort in one other person in my life, and you buried what was left of the people he practiced it on. Dumbledore sat with that a long time in the dark, with a glass of something amber he did not drink. He had told himself for 10 years that he was building a shield. He had told himself that the seals were mercy, that the smallness was safety, that the leash was love, and he had believed all of it, all the way down, and now he sat in the wreckage of his own certainty and made himself look, for once, at the thing in the cold chamber he never visited. That he had also always been building a weapon he could control, and that the 2 projects had worn the same face for so long that he had genuinely lost the ability to tell them apart, and that the child, somehow, impossibly, had not. The child had seen the leash inside the shield. A child of 11 had looked at the greatest wizard of the age and seen, precisely, the seam Dumbledore had spent a decade making sure no one would ever find, and had said nothing, and had smiled a homesick smile, and had gone on being managed while quietly in the dark, becoming unmanageable. What have I made? Dumbledore said aloud to the empty office, to the fire on the perch, and the bird looked at him with its ancient eye and did not answer, and he did not know whether the question was about the child or about himself, and that not knowing was, he understood, the truest thing left in him. He resolved that night on the one course he had left, the course a frightened master always comes to when persuasion fails and force is unthinkable. He would look inside the child directly. He would open the child's mind and see the whole of what had woken there, before he decided what, if anything, could still be done. He would do it after the holidays. He would do it himself or have Severus do it, and he told himself it was for the child's protection, and he had at last begun to hear the hollow ring the words made when he said them, and he drank the amber after all. Harry came back to Hogwarts in January, 6 seals lighter and 3 to go, and on the first night in his own bed in the tower he let the voice give him the count, which had become a small ritual between them, a way of ending the day by naming exactly how much of himself he had gotten back. 6 seals broken, the voice said. Capstone, sensorium, mimic, reservoir, aegis, edge, throughput, sight, learning, capacity, resistance, and the freedom from the wand. LOCKS remaining, 3. 3. Harry thought, what's behind them? I can feel their shapes now from this side, THUGH, not their contents. The 7th is the mind, not the wall we slammed on SNAP, that was the crude version. The true 7th is the whole of your thinking and mind freed. What we are doing now, you and I, is a candle of what is behind that door. A pause. The 8th I cannot look at directly. It is the one that answers the thing behind the turban. It is the part of you that is glad to see the monster. I do not know what it is and I do not want to guess, and you will not like it when we find out. And the 9th, Harry thought, the last one. The voice was quiet for a long moment, longer than it had ever been. The 9th is the one he laid first, it said at last. DEPST, oldest. The first thing he did to you before all the others, when you were 1 year old and he stood over your cot and looked at what was there and decided the world could not be allowed to hold it. I cannot see past IT, operator. It is the floor of you, and it is also, I think, the whole of you, and when it opens I do not know if I will still be a voice in your head or whether I will simply be you, the way a river is simply the sea once it arrives. I am telling you this so that when the last door opens you are not alone with the surprise of it. That is the one thing I can still give you that he never did. Warning. Harry lay in the dark, 6 seals lighter and 3 to go, and did not test the light and did not sleep for a while, and thought about a man in a tower asking an empty room what he had made, and a girl who had held his hand and said, "We won't let him spend you," and a starving thing behind a turban that had recoiled from an ocean, and a chain in a doorframe he had chosen to leave standing because it was wound through his mother's love. He understood that the quiet, careful, hidden part of the year was ending, that the last 3 doors would not open quietly, and that when they opened the whole castle was going to find out at once exactly how badly the greatest wizard of the age had misjudged the child he had spent his life keeping small. He found that he was ready for that. He found, checking, that he was not even afraid. He was at last almost his full size, and the last 3 inches of it were waiting for him in the dark, and he closed his eyes and went to meet the term that would carry him toward them. The storm announced itself, as storms do, with a change in the pressure before any cloud showed. Harry felt it in the first week of term, in the way the adults around him rearranged themselves. Snape stopped baiting him in potions, which was worse than the baiting, because a Snape who has stopped trying to catch you out is a Snape who has decided he already knows what you are and is only deciding what to do about it. Twice bending over Harry's cauldron, Snape reached for the surface of his mind, not the contemptuous jab of October, but something slower, more careful, the probe of a man taking a measurement he intends to report exactly. And both times the fifth seal turned it aside without Harry lifting a finger, the hostile attention sliding off the aegis like rain off slate, and both times Snape straightened with his face a shade grayer. Because a wall you cannot even find to push against is more frightening than one that pushes back. "He's testing you for the headmaster," Hermione said over a barricade of books, having watched the whole slow business with the attention she gave to everything that threatened her friends. "That's not idle, he's building a case. And when he's finished building it, Dumbledore's going to act on it, and Dumbledore only has one move left, Harry. He's tried to smooth you, he's tried to steer you, neither took. There's exactly one thing a wizard like that does when he can't manage a mind from the outside. He opens it," Harry said. He had known it since the Amberlit night he could not have witnessed and somehow felt the decision settling into place 4 floors up. "He's going to look inside himself or through Snape. He's going to try to read me all the way to the bottom and see the whole of what he woke. And when he does," the voice said, quiet and certain, "he will find the 7th door. Not because he means to open it, because a mind like his, pushing that deep into a mind like yours, is exactly the pressure the 7th seal was never built to survive. He is going to reach in to take a measurement, operator, and he is going to knock out the floor he is standing on." Harry sat in the January dark with his 3 unopened doors and his 2 good friends and his impossible quiet depth, and did not send the warning he could have sent, did not steer around the collision he could see coming, because he had spent his whole life being managed by a man who thought he knew best, and he had decided, somewhere over the Christmas hedges, that he was done being the one who bent. If Albus Dumbledore wanted to look inside him, then Albus Dumbledore could look inside him, and could find out, the way everyone eventually found out, that the difference between a boy you have decided to spend and a boy who has decided not to be spent is the whole of the war, and that the war was already, quietly, and without a single spell yet cast, being lost by the wrong side. He let the collision come. He went to his classes and ate at his table and flew his practices, and he waited for the hand to reach into him. And when it came, a week later in a cold classroom after hours, it would take the 7th door off its hinges, and the wizard who reached would see in one unbearable instant everything. Harry was ready. He had been ready, he thought, since a hat with a conscience had said 4 words in a bright loud hall, and every day since had only been the slow business of the rest of him catching up. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The mirror, the summons that ended the hiding, came on an ordinary Thursday, and there was nothing ordinary about the way it came. It was not parchment this time. Professor McGonagall stopped Harry after Transfiguration, and there was a stiffness in her that he read instantly, the specific discomfort of a decent person carrying a message she has not been told the whole of. "The headmaster would like to see you this evening, Potter," she said, "after supper. He asked me to walk you up myself." And that was the escort, because a man who sends a teacher to walk a boy to a meeting is a man who has decided the child might not come on his own, and Harry looked at McGonagall's careful face and understood that whatever was going to happen tonight, she had been made a small unknowing part of it, and he felt sorry for her and said, "Of course, Professor." "Thank you," and gave her a settled, ordinary smile that let her believe, for a few more hours, that she was doing a kindness. He spent the afternoon not preparing, because there was nothing to prepare. He had learned over 5 months that the moves you plan are the moves your opponent plans around, and that the only real preparation for a confrontation with a mind greater than yours is to have already decided who you are, so that when the pressure comes you are not assembling yourself under fire. Harry had decided who he was somewhere over the Christmas hedges, so he flew instead one long cold circuit of the empty pitch in the failing light, because flying was the place the drawer went quiet, and he wanted the drawer quiet for what was coming. "This is it," the voice said as he walked back up to the castle through the blue dusk. "He has finished building his case. Snap's probes, the instruments, the failed workings, the match." He has enough now to know he is blind, and a Dumbledore who knows he is blind will do the one thing that is left. He will open your mind himself, not SNAP himself. He will not trust this to another hand. I know Harry thought he had known since the Christmas hedges, and when he does, the seventh door comes off. Yes, and here is the thing I need you to understand before you walk into that room, operator, because once it begins there will be no time. The voice had gone very level, the way it went when it was about to say the thing that mattered most. Legilimcy is not a one-way door, it is a bridge. He thinks he is building a bridge into you. The instant the seventh seal breaks, the bridge opens both ways, and you will be standing at your end of it with the whole of your mind unlocked for the first time in your life, and he will be standing at his end with a century of SCRTS and no wall left that you cannot cross. He is going to reach in to read you. You are going to read HIM, all of HIM. Are you ready for that? Because you cannot unknow a man once you have stood inside HIM. Harry stopped on the stone steps with the winter light going gray behind the mountains and thought about it honestly, the way the voice had taught him to think about things without flinching and without pretending. No, he thought, but I'm not going to be ready later either. Some doors you only get to be not ready in front of. Let's go be not ready. That, said the voice, is the most honest thing you have ever said to me. File it yourself. You will need it. Dumbledore's office at night was a different country than by day, the silver instruments throwing small moving lights across the walls, the portraits pretending to sleep, the bird of fire a low banked glow on its perch, and the headmaster himself behind the desk with no smile at all, which was how Harry knew more than by anything else that the performance was finally over. Sit down, Harry, Dumbledore said and gestured to the chair, and Harry sat, and for a while neither of them said anything, two players who had each finally understood that the other had been playing. You have known for some time, Dumbledore said at last, that I am not what I have appeared to be to you. I would like to know how long. It was, Harry thought, an honest question, and he decided to answer it honestly, because the time for the homesick child performance had passed, and it would have been an insult to them both to keep it up. Since the sorting, he said, I felt the first one break, I felt what was under it, and I saw your face when you looked at me, and I've spent my whole life reading the faces of people who were kind in public and something else in private, and I knew the difference. I didn't have the details. Most of them now. Something moved in the old face, and it was not anger. The details, Dumbledore repeated softly. And what do you believe the details are, Harry? 9 seals, Harry said, laid over 10 years. The first one when I was 1 year old over my cot the night my parents died. You looked at what was in me and you decided the world couldn't be allowed to hold it, and you've spent my whole life making sure I never reached the bottom of myself. You kept me weak so I couldn't run. You kept me reachable so you could steer me. You kept me small so no clever monster would find me before you'd finished shaping me into the one you wanted. And you told yourself every single time that it was mercy, and you believed it, and that's the part I can't get past, sir. Not the cage, the fact that you cried while you built it. The silence after that was enormous. A silver instrument on the far table ticked once, a small silver planet swinging on its wire, and stilled. You are 11 years old, Dumbledore said, and his voice had gone rough at the edges. I stopped being 11 at the sorting, Harry said without heat, because there was no heat in him for this, only a great cold clarity. That's what you took more than the power. You took the part where I got to be 11. I've been doing arithmetic since September. You want to look inside me and see how much I know, so look, I know you've been wanting to since Christmas. That's why I came up the stairs on my own after the second step and let McGonagall think she was walking me. I'm not going to fight you, sir. I want you to see. I'm tired of being the only one in this room who knows what's true. And Albus Dumbledore, who had come to that meeting intending to gently and secretly open a child's mind to measure the danger in it, looked at the child openly inviting him to do it, and understood that he had been outmaneuvered in a way he did not yet have the shape of, and hesitated because some old instinct in him had begun, too late, to smell the trap. But he had staked the world on this boy, and a man who has staked the world on a piece must, at the end, turn it over and look at its face, and so he set aside the instinct and reached, with the full patient force of 100 years of skill, into Harry's mind. He reached in. The seventh seal did not crack, or strain, or give way along a hairline the way the others had. It was not built for the pressure of a master legilimens pushing with the full force of 100 years of skill, because nothing was, because Dumbledore had made the seal himself and had made it to hold against everything except, it turned out, his own hand at full strength, the one force he had never thought to defend it from. It broke the way a dam breaks all at once along its whole length, and the sound of it in Harry's skull was the cathedral bell again, but rung by the entire tower of bells at once, every note at once, and the mind of Harry Potter came fully, finally, online. Seal VII mirror released, the voice said, and then the voice was not a voice anymore, or was the voice of the whole of him, because the seventh door had been the one gating the voice's own cognition, and what had been a laconic presence keeping books at the edge of Harry's thoughts unfolded in an instant into the entire architecture of a mind that had been running at a fraction of itself for its whole life, and was now, without warning, complete. Harry thought a thought, and it was the largest and clearest thought he had ever had, and it contained, effortlessly, more than his old mind could have held in a year. He saw the whole board at once, every piece, every consequence branching out from every move in bright, clean lines, whole futures unrolling and being weighed and set down in the time it took to breathe. He saw the conversation he was in from the inside and the outside at the same time, saw his own words and Dumbledore's, and the three unspoken things under each of them. He felt his memory reorganize itself beneath him, 5 months of filed things suddenly indexed and cross-referenced and instantly available, every fingerprint, every residue, every glance laid out in a single coherent map of the year, and he understood, in one glance at that map, things he had been too small to understand while living them. He became, in the space between two heartbeats, the thing the seals had been laid to prevent, not a powerful boy but a mind that could hold the shape of an entire war in a single glance and turn it over and see the flaw in it. And the terror and the glory of it broke over him together, and he did not drown because the voice was there, folded into him now, no longer separate, steadying the flood from the inside the way it had steadied it from the edge, saying, in what was now simply the deepest register of his own thought, breathe, it is only you, it was always going to be you, breathe and look. And because the bridge ran both ways, he looked back down it into Albus Dumbledore. He did not mean to see all of it. That was the thing he would keep afterward in the ledger, that even in the first flood of a mind with no walls he had not gone digging, had not rummaged, had reached for only the one thing he needed, which was the truth, and the truth had come to him anyway with everything attached, because you cannot pull one thread from a life without the whole tapestry coming with it. He saw the prophecy first, because it was the root of everything else, glowing at the center of Dumbledore like a coal that had never gone out. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. Either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. He saw Dumbledore hearing it decades ago in a dim room above a pub, and he saw the exact moment the old man's grief became a plan, the moment he stopped seeing a child and started seeing a solution, and he saw, folded under it, the older grief that had taught Dumbledore to build plans out of children in the first place, a sister long dead, a friend turned tyrant, a duel, a guilt worn so deep into the wizard that it had become the shape of his spine. Harry saw where the general had come from. It did not excuse the general, it explained him, which was worse, because you cannot cleanly hate a thing you understand. He saw the night at Godric's Hollow, through Dumbledore's memory and reconstruction both. The curse that should have killed a 1-year-old rebounding off a mother's sacrifice, and the thing that no one had planned for, the fragment, a splinter of the Dark Lord's own torn soul flung loose in the rebound and lodging, screaming in the only living thing at hand, in the baby in the cot, and fusing there, and being taken hold of by something in the baby that should not have existed and did, a lattice, a core. An architecture already forming that reached out and did not let the splinter possess it, but instead, impossibly owned it, folded it in, began even then to make it part of itself. He saw Dumbledore arrive at the ruined house and look into the cot and see, with his own terrible sight, what Harry was, not a survivor, a cathedral half-built, with a piece of the enemy sealed inside it, and something older and stranger than either wizard or Dark Lord already stirring at the base of it. He saw the old man's horror and his awe and his grief, and he saw the decision form the same night, the 9th seal, the first and deepest, laid over a screaming infant by a weeping hand. The world cannot hold this. No one can hold this. Least of all a child fate has already marked to die. I will make him small. I will make him safe. I will make him a boy, an ordinary boy, for as long as I can, and I will keep the splinter in him because the prophecy says one of them must die, and if the splinter dies, the war ends, and the splinter lives inside the child. So. Harry saw the whole of the plan then, laid bare in the center of the wizard who had made it, and it was worse than he had feared and more human than he had hoped, both at once. The seals were not only a cage, they were a countdown. Dumbledore had never intended to keep Harry small forever. He had intended to keep him small until the war came round again, and then to remove the seals himself in the right order, giving the child exactly enough power to fight and never enough to become the thing in the cot, and to send him at the end, trusting and loved and aimed, to the one place the plan required him to go, which was to his death, so that the splinter would die with him and the Dark Lord could be finished. The child had to die. That was the floor under everything. Everything else, the smallness, the leash, the loyalty workings, the whole 10-year architecture of tenderness and control, had been built on that single stone. The child has to die, and I have to be the one who sends him, and he has to go willingly, or it doesn't work, and so he must love me, and so I must be worth loving, and so I must not let him grow strong enough to find another way, because if he finds another way he will take it, and if he takes it the splinter lives, and if the splinter lives the world burns, and I have already watched the world burn once, and I will do anything, keep from watching it again, including this. including breaking my own heart on the body of a child I have grown to love, because that is the price, and I am the only one willing to pay it, and that is either the greatest love or the greatest arrogance in the history of the world, and I have long since lost the ability to tell which. Harry stood inside the whole of it, and did not rummage further, and withdrew. He came back into the room and found that only a few seconds had passed, and that his cheeks were wet, and that Dumbledore had gone the color of ash, because the bridge ran both ways, and Dumbledore had felt it. He had reached into a boy's mind expecting to measure a danger, and had felt the child's mind unfold into something vast and clear and unafraid, and had felt worse unbearably. The child walked back down the bridge into him and stand in the center of his life and read it, all of it, the prophecy and the plan and the death and the terrible arithmetic of the love, and had been able to do nothing, nothing at all, to stop him. For the first time in a very long life, Albus Dumbledore had been the one who was seen, and the seeing had been done by a child he had spent that life keeping too small to do it. "You cried," Harry said, wiping his face, matter of fact, because someone had to speak and it might as well be him. "Just now, reading me, I felt it. You reached in to find out how dangerous I am, and what you found made you cry. I want you to know I noticed, because you're going to spend the rest of tonight telling yourself I'm cold, that whatever's in me now isn't the child you meant to save, and I need you to know I saw you cry, so you can't tell yourself that lie cleanly. I'm still here. That's the thing you got wrong, sir. You thought if I ever got this big I'd stop being a person. I didn't. I'm bigger, and I'm still exactly as much a person as I was, which is the whole problem for you, isn't it? Because a monster you could kill with a clear conscience, and a person you have to keep lying to yourself about." "Harry," Dumbledore's voice was barely there. "What I have done, I know what you've done. I've known for months, and now I've seen it from the inside, so let's not do the part where you explain it to me. You did it out of love and fear, and you can't tell them apart anymore, and neither can I, so that's a draw. Here's what I want you to understand, because it's the only thing that matters now." Harry leaned forward, and his voice did not rise, and that was what made it terrible. "I'm not going to die for your plan. The splinter's mine. I've owned it since I was 1 year old. You saw that yourself just now. It's not possessing me. I'm not a container you have to break to get at it. Whatever the prophecy meant, it didn't mean I have to walk into a room and let someone kill me so a piece of a dead man dies too. There's another way. There's always another way. You just needed there not to be, because the other way meant you couldn't control the ending. Well, you can't control the ending. That door came off tonight along with all the rest. I'm going to end this war, sir. I'm probably the only one who can. You were right about that much. But I'm going to end it alive, and I'm going to end it my way, and you are going to have to decide in the time we have left whether you can bear to help me do the thing you spent a decade making sure I could never do, which is survive." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and something in the ancient face was breaking and reassembling, the slow, catastrophic work of a man revising a belief he had built his soul on. "If you are wrong," he said very quietly, "the price is the world." "I know," said Harry. "I've done the arithmetic. I've done more arithmetic in the last 5 minutes than you managed in 10 years, because you did yours with a piece of yourself walled off, the piece that didn't want to find another way, and I did mine with all of me online. I'm not wrong. But even if I were, sir, here's the thing you never let yourself weigh, because it would have unbalanced the whole equation. A world that can only be saved by talking an 11-year-old into walking to his own death is a world that has already lost something it can't get back by winning. You'd have won the war and become the thing you were fighting, and told yourself the corpse of a boy you loved was the cost of decency. I'm not going to let you do that to yourself. That's the last mercy anyone in this castle is going to show you, and it's me showing it to you, and you should sit with how that feels." He did not stay to watch the old man absorb it. He went to the door, and Dumbledore's voice stopped him with one word, his name, and Harry paused with his hand on the frame. "How many are left?" Dumbledore asked, and it was the question of a man who had spent his life counting, asking the only thing he had the right to ask. "Of the 9, how many doors remain?" "Ooh," Harry said without turning around. "The splinter and the last one, the one you laid first over my cot. I don't know yet what's behind that one. Neither do you. You sealed it because you couldn't bear to look. We're going to find out together whether you were right to be afraid, and I'd genuinely rather you were there when we do, because whatever's at the bottom of me, sir, you're the closest thing to family I've got, and that is the single most damning sentence I know how to say, and I mean it as one." And he left and went down the spiral stair, and the gargoyle closed behind him, and he stood in the dark corridor with the whole of his mind online for the first time in all his years, and let himself, for the space of exactly one breath, feel the grief of it, the one named grief he would allow himself the whole of that long, strange year. Grief for the 11-year-old he had not got to be, and for the old man upstairs who had loved him wrong, and for the two of them stuck in the same story with no clean way out. Then he folded the grief and filed it, because there was work to do, and the work, he could feel, was about to arrive all at once. Hermione and Ron were waiting for him in the common room, because Hermione had refused to go to bed until she knew he had come back from the headmaster's office hole, and Ron had refused to let Hermione wait alone, and Harry came through the portrait hole with the whole of his mind online and found the two of them by the dying fire and told them because they had earned it, all of it. The prophecy, the plan, the death that had been meant for him. The two doors left. And the thing moving through the castle even now toward the third floor. Ron went white and then characteristically angry, which was Ron's way of being frightened for someone he loved. He was going to let you die, he said. Dumbledore, he was going to walk you into a room and let you know who killed you and call it a plan, and he made you weak your whole life so you'd say yes. He stood up. Right, well, he can get stuffed then, can't he? What do we do? You don't do anything, Harry said. I'm going down there tonight. Quirrell's going for the stone and there's no one left in the castle who can stop him, because Dumbledore's about to be lured away and everyone else is a normal wizard against a thing that isn't. And the last two doors are going to open down there, next to something made of the same stuff they're made of, and I don't know what I'm going to be on the other side of that, and I'm not risking either of you to find out. No, said Hermione, standing too, and her voice had the flatness that meant there would be no argument, only the appearance of one. Absolutely not. You listen to me, Harry Potter. The reason you're still a person and not the thing Dumbledore was afraid of is that you have people. That's the whole difference. You said so yourself. The hat said so. Everything says so. He sealed you alone. He kept you alone. Alone is his plan. So we are not letting you go down there alone, because the second you're alone in the dark with a monster made of your own bottom, alone becomes the most dangerous thing in the castle, more dangerous than Quirrell, more dangerous than the thing behind him. We come as far as we can. We come until we physically can't. That's not up for discussion. That's just what friends are, and if you'd had any growing up you'd know it, so shut up and let us. Harry looked at the two of them standing between him and the portrait hole, an angry boy and an immovable girl, offering to walk into the dark under the castle toward a thing that could kill them, for no reason at all except that he was theirs, and he understood that this was the exact thing Dumbledore had spent 10 years making sure he would never have, and that having it at the last hour was the reason he was going to win. As far as the last door, he said. You come as far as the last door. And when I tell you to stop, you stop, because past the last door it isn't a place two people can help me. It's a place inside myself, and I have to go into it the way everyone goes into themselves, which is alone. Those are the terms. Terms accepted, said Hermione, and picked up her wand, and Ron cracked his knuckles, and the three of them went out through the portrait hole together into a castle that had no idea what was coming down through it. You are different now, said the voice from inside him, no longer at the edge but woven all the way through, as they went down the moving stairs toward the third floor, and Harry noticed that he could not entirely tell anymore where his own thought ended and the voice began, and found that this did not frighten him, that it felt less like being crowded and more like being at last all in one place. The seventh door was the one that kept us separate. I was always you, operator. I was the part of you that woke up first because it had to, because someone had to keep the books while the rest of you was sealed. LOCKS remaining, too, and one thing, while I am still distinct enough to say IT to you as a separate voice, because after the next door I may not be. You did a thing tonight that Dumbledore never managed in 100 years of being the greatest wizard alive. You stood inside another person with the power to take anything you wanted, and you took only the truth, and you left the rest, and you came back out still yourself. He sealed you because he was afraid of what you would do with power. Tonight you answered HIM. You will want to remember that you answered HIM before the hard part, not after. Harry held that and understood that the voice was preparing him for something, the way it always did, and he was about to ask what when the castle told him itself. The resonance hit him like a struck bell through the hole of the stone. He had felt the thing behind Quirrell reach for him a dozen times, a compass swinging past north, a low note struck against a low note. This was not that. This was the wrongness fully unhidden, fully awake, and moving fast downward through the castle toward the third floor, and it was no longer patient, no longer starving quiet, it was triumphant, because whatever had held it back for a year had finally been dealt with, and Harry, with his whole mind online and the castle laid out before his sight like a lit diagram, saw exactly what had happened and what was about to. Dumbledore had left, that was the trigger. Even now, above them, an owl had arrived at the office with an urgent false summons to the ministry. A lure Quirrell had been holding in reserve, and the greatest wizard alive, shaken to his roots by what had just happened in his office, had taken the lure because a Dumbledore whose certainty has just been shattered is a Dumbledore who reaches for the familiar shape of duty, and duty said go to London, and Quirrell had known that duty would say go, and had timed everything, the whole year of waiting. For the night the old man's guard was down, the way to the third floor was open, the stone was within reach. And the thing behind the turban, moving toward it now through the dark, was made of the same material as the last two doors in Harry, and it wanted the stone, and it had recognized Harry across a Quidditch pitch as an ocean it did not understand, and it was, Harry realized with the whole clean, terrible speed of his new mind, going to get what it wanted unless someone stopped it, and there was no one left in the castle who could. Except one boy with two doors left to open and two friends who would not let him go alone. It is time, the voice said, and it was not a question and it was not dry, it was simply true. The last two will not open quietly. They will open down there in the dark with the thing that is made of the same stuff as the bottom of you. You have been asking since Halloween why a piece of you is glad to see the monster. You are about to find out. Geo carefully, operator. Geo all the way down. And whatever you meet at the bottom of yourself, remember that you came back out of Dumbledore still a person. You will need to do it once more, and the second time will be harder, because the second time the thing you are standing inside will be you. Harry Potter reached the door on the third floor, the one behind which a very painful death had been promised to anyone who opened it, and found it already unlocked, already ajar, the thing ahead of him having gone through without slowing. And he looked at his two friends in the torchlight, an angry boy and an immovable girl, and did not run and did not hesitate, and led them down into the dark of the castle, 2 doors from the whole of himself. To meet the thing that had been waiting at the bottom of him since the night his mother died. They went down through a sleeping castle, and the castle knew. Harry felt it in the stone under his feet, as he felt everything now, the wards drawing back from him as he passed, the moving stairs settling into place a half-second before he reached them. The whole vast ancient building leaning aside to let him through, because 1,000 years of the oldest magic in Britain had felt the first 8 doors open above it, and had made, without being asked, its own quiet decision about the child walking down into its cellars. Ron kept close to the wall and said nothing, which for Ron was the loudest thing he could have done. Hermione walked in the center of the corridor with her wand out and her jaw level and her eyes moving, cataloging exits which she had learned from Harry without either of them ever naming the lesson. "Whatever's down there," she said, low, as they reached the last stair before the forbidden floor, "you don't have to be clever about us. You've been clever about everyone all year, managing what people see, deciding how much of the truth they get. You don't have to do that with us. We already know the worst of it. There's nothing left to manage." "I know," Harry said, and found, testing it, that he did. "That's the strange part. I've spent my whole life deciding how much of me people got to have. And I'm about to have all of me, finally, and the only 2 people I want in the corridor while it happens are the 2 I've stopped hiding from." He looked at them in the torchlight, the anxious boy and the immovable girl. "That's not nothing. Dumbledore made sure I'd never have it. And here it is anyway, at the worst possible moment, which is exactly when you find out whether a thing is real." The forbidden door stood ahead of them at the end of the dark corridor, unlocked, ajar, a thin blade of colder dark spilling out from the gap where the thing ahead of them had already passed through without slowing. Harry put his hand flat against the wood, and felt, on the far side of it, the beginning of the descent that would take him down through everything the teachers had built and down. Past that, through the last 2 doors of himself, and he pushed the door open, and the cold came up to meet them behind the 3rd floor door. A monstrous 3-headed dog lay sprawled and snoring, a harp still playing itself in the corner, left enchanted to sleep by whoever had gone ahead. And Harry led them past it on soft feet and through the open trapdoor in the floor, and they dropped, one after another, into the dark below the castle, into the sequence of guardians that the teachers had built across the autumn to keep the stone from exactly this night. They landed in something soft that moved. "Don't struggle," Hermione said instantly, going still even as the tendrils wound up her arms, because Hermione had read about everything and recognized a killing plant the way other people recognize a friend. "Devil's snare. It hates fire and it hates light. Struggling feeds it." Everyone stopped moving and let me, and she was already up, having gone limp and slipped through, and she raised her wand and threw a rope of bright blue flame across the whole writhing floor, and the plant recoiled shrieking from the light and dropped Harry and Ron gasping onto stone. Harry could have burned the whole thing to ash with a thought. He let Hermione do it with her wand and her book learning, because it was hers to do, and because a person who has decided to remain a person spends other people's competence instead of his own power wherever he can, and because Hermione's face, when the snare let go, was worth more than any shortcut. The next chamber was full of wings. A cloud of tiny flying keys glittered near the ceiling, and a single old broom hung waiting by a locked door, and this one was Harry's, plainly, obviously built for a flyer, and he did not pretend otherwise. He took the broom and went up into the swarm, and here he let a little of himself show, because there was no one to hide it from but 2 people who already knew. And he flew the way the seals had never let him fly in front of a crowd, 100 keys scattering and reforming and diving at him and finding nothing to hit, and he plucked the one bright bent old key out of the storm on a single pass and dropped to the door and opened it, and Ron said quietly, "Blimey," which from Ron was an oration. Then the chessboard, it filled the next chamber, black and white stone pieces taller than a grown man, and the far door was on the other side, and the pieces would not let them pass without a game. And Harry looked at the board with his whole mind online and saw, in one glance, 6 ways across, and turned to say so, and found Ron already staring at the pieces with a light in his face that Harry had only ever seen there over a battered chessboard by the common room fire, the light of the one thing Ron Weasley was better at than anyone he knew. "This is mine," Ron said. "Don't argue." You throw games, mate. I've watched you do it all year to make me feel clever. Well, here's the one board where clever's the whole point and it's actually mine, so let me have it, the way you were always going to let me have it. He took the place of a knight. He put Harry and Hermione into safe squares. And he played seriously, brilliantly, a boy conducting a battle in stone, until the only winning move left was a sacrifice, and Ron looked at it and understood it and said, in a voice that shook only a little, "Once I make my move, the queen'll take me. Then you're free to check the king." It's the only way, and Harry started to say no, started to say he could unmake the whole board with a thought, and Ron said, "And then it wouldn't have been real, and I'd have been the sixth Weasley who tagged along and got carried. Let me be the one who did something. Let me Harry," and there was nothing in the whole of Harry's enormous mind that could argue with that, because it was the same thing Harry had said to Dumbledore an hour ago. Let me be the one who does something. Let me choose the ending, and so Harry let his friend make his move, and the White Queen came crashing across the board and struck the Stone Knight down, and Ron fell, and Hermione screamed, and Harry stood in his safe square with his eyes burning and made himself finish the game. 3 moves, checkmate. The door swinging open because Ron's sacrifice would mean nothing if Harry wasted it grieving on the board instead of walking through the door it had bought. "He's alive," Harry said, kneeling by Ron, whose chest rose and fell, whose head was bleeding, who was out cold and breathing. "Knocked out, he's alive, Hermione." And he pressed Sleep Heal Hold into his friend as gently as he had once pressed it into a troll, steadying the concussion, and knew Ron would wake sore and whole and insufferably proud, and stood back up. The next room held a riddle, 7 bottles in a line, and a wall of purple flame ahead and black flame behind, and a scroll of logic that was, Hermione said, reading it twice, "Not about magic at all, it's about reason, which is the point. It's Snape's. He wanted to keep out the ones who could only cast." And she worked it fast, her finger moving down the line, and named the one small bottle that would carry a person forward through the black fire into the last chamber. And there was only enough in it for one. "You go back," Harry told her. "Take the bigger bottle, go back through the purple, get to Ron, get help, get anyone," and Hermione. He stopped because this was the last door, the one he'd told them they'd have to stop at, and here it was, made of black fire, exactly as he'd promised, a place 2 people couldn't help him. "You did the thing you came to do. You made sure I wasn't alone until the exact moment being alone stopped being the danger and started being the point. Everything that's about to happen in there is inside myself, and nobody goes into themselves with company. You gave me the whole way down. That's not nothing. That's the opposite of nothing. That's the reason I'm still me." Hermione looked at him with her chin up and her eyes wet and did not cry because she had decided not to, and said fiercely, "You come back out still, you. That's the terms, that's the only terms I've got left. You go in there and you meet whatever's at the bottom of you and you come back out still, Harry, or I will never forgive you, and you know exactly how long my grudges last." And she pressed the small bottle into his hand and turned and went back the way they'd come, toward Ron, toward help, toward the world above, and did not look back, because looking back was a thing you did when you weren't sure, and Hermione Granger had decided to be sure. Harry drank the small bottle. Cold went through him like ice down his spine, and he stepped through the black fire alone, 2 doors from the whole of himself, into the last chamber under the castle, where the mirror of Eris stood tall and silver in the center of the floor, and a stammering man in a purple turban stood before it and turned at the sound of Harry's step with no stammer left in him at all. "Potter," said Quirrell in a voice that was 2 voices. I wondered which of them would come. "And it is you, of course it is you. It was always going to be you. Come in, boy, come and be seen." Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The splint of the last chamber under the castle was round and cold and lit by nothing Harry could find, a silver light with no source, and in the center of it stood the mirror of Eris, tall as a doorway, its frame carved with words Harry read backward without effort now, "I show not your face but your heart's desire." And before the mirror stood Professor Quirrell, and behind Professor Quirrell's face there was another face, and both of them were looking at Harry, and neither of them stammered. "Come in, boy," said the 2 voices braided into one. "Come and be seen. I have waited a very long time to see you properly, and the mirror is being unhelpful, and I begin to suspect that you and I want the same thing from it, though for opposite reasons, which is a joke the universe has played on both of us, and I have never had much patience for the universe's jokes." Harry stepped into the round room and let the black fire close behind him and did not reach for his power, because reaching for it was a tell, and a tell was a thing you spent, and he had learned all year to spend nothing he did not have to. He walked in as he walked into every dangerous room, slow, cataloging exits, except that there were no exits here, only the black fire he had come through and the purple fire on the far side and the mirror between, and he cataloged them anyway out of habit, out of the discipline that had kept him alive in a cupboard, and filed the fact that there was nowhere to run and set it down beside the other fact, which was that he had not come here to run. He looked at the second face where it grew from the back of Quirrell's shaved skull, red-eyed, flat-nosed, terrible, a face that had once been a man's and had traded the last of its humanity for the promise of never dying, and he felt at the sight of it the exact thing the voice had warned him of since Halloween, the thing he had dreaded finding in himself. The deep sealed dark at the bottom of him leaned toward that ruined face the way a lost child leans toward a voice it half remembers, glad and comfortable, and at home. It was the worst feeling of the year, worse than the fingerprints, worse than the leash in the doorframe, because it was a gladness he had not chosen and could not argue with. A piece of him delighted to be in a murderer's presence, and every instinct he had built said that a boy whose depths were glad to see Lord Voldemort was a boy who was, somewhere he could not see, already lost. There it is, the voice said inside him, very quiet. The eighth door is straining toward HIM. The part of you that is glad, hold operator, do not let the gladness drive, watch it the way you watch everything. It is telling us what it is, and what it is telling us is not what you have been afraid of 45months. Watch. I know what it is, Harry thought, and the knowing was cold and complete and had arrived all at once with his unlocked mind. It's a piece of him. It's been in me since Godric's Hollow. That's why the well leans toward him, not because I'm his. Because a piece of him is mine, and pieces lean toward the hole they were cut from, the way a splinter itches toward the hand. You know, said Voldemort, watching Harry's face with the red eyes, and something in the two-voiced tone sharpened. You know what you carry, how interesting. Quirrell said you were only a boy, a lucky boy, a boy with a story, but you know. You feel it the way I feel it, the little piece of me that went astray that night, that I have looked for on and off through 11 years of being less than a ghost, less than the meanest spirit, a thing that possessed snakes and drank unicorn blood and waited. I felt it wake up this autumn. I felt it from across an ocean in the body of a stammering fool, a small light coming on where there had been dark, and I came here for the stone, boy, I will not pretend otherwise. I came here to make myself a body and live forever. But when I felt that little light, I confess the stone became almost secondary, because a piece of my soul has been living inside the boy who lived for 11 years, and I would very much like it back. You can't have it, Harry said. He said it plainly, the way you state a fact of weather, and the flatness of it made both faces go still. It's not yours anymore, Harry went on, walking a slow, careful arc around the edge of the round room, keeping the mirror between himself and the thing at all times, and he was not stalling. He was reading, letting his mage sight map the chamber, the mirror, the wrongness, looking for the shape of the trap he was standing in. That's the part you haven't worked out yet. You threw a piece of yourself into a 1-year-old by accident, and you assumed, because you assume it about everything, that it stayed yours. It didn't. Something in me caught it, not to keep you out, to take it. I've had 11 years to make it part of me, and I didn't waste them, even sealed, even small. It stopped being a splinter of you a long time ago. It's a splinter of me now. It has my grain. That is not possible, said Voldemort, and for the first time the two voices came slightly apart, Quirrell's thin terror bleeding through the master's certainty. A piece of a soul does not change owners, it anchors, it waits. It is mine, as all the pieces are mine, as I am the only one who has ever had the courage to tear his soul at all. It is mine. It's not, though, Harry said gently, almost kindly, because he had discovered over a long year of dangerous rooms that gentleness unbalanced monsters far more than defiance, that a boy who refuses to be frightened takes something from a thing that has only ever fed on fear. And I can prove it to you, which is going to be the worst moment of a very long life, so brace for it. You've been trying to use the mirror. You want the stone, and the mirror only gives the stone to someone who wants to find it and not use it, which you can't manage, because you've never wanted anything in your life you didn't want to use. You've been standing here failing in front of a piece of glass for an hour, a dark lord defeated by a riddle a clever child could solve, and it has been eating you, that failure, I can see it eating you. And then I walked in and you thought there, the child who doesn't want to use anything, make him look in the mirror, let the glass give him the stone and take it out of his pocket after. That was the plan. I read it off you before I finished the first step into the room. That's the other thing that isn't a splinter's trick, by the way, reading you, that's all mine. That's the part of me you should actually be frightened of, and you're not, because you've spent so long being the most powerful thing in every room that you've forgotten power was ever the thing that mattered least. Voldemort's red eyes narrowed to slits, and the temperature of the round room dropped, and Harry felt the wrongness gather itself, and knew he had perhaps a minute before this stopped being words and became something with no words in it at all. Look in the mirror, boy, said Voldemort, silk over steel, deciding Harry saw to run the plan anyway, because a mind like that could not abandon a plan even when it had been read aloud back to it. Indulge an old spirit, tell me what you see. And Harry, who had been maneuvering toward exactly this since he entered, because the mirror was the one thing in the room that could tell him the truth about himself, and he wanted that truth in his hands before the last two doors opened, stepped in front of the mirror of Eris and looked. He did not see the stone. He had half expected to, the way cleverness predicted, the mirror rewarding the pure of heart with the object in the pocket. He saw instead himself, and it took him a moment to understand what the reflection was doing, because it was not showing him a thing he wanted to have. It was showing him a person he wanted to be. The Harry in the mirror stood at his full height, taller than the child in front of it, grown, and around him the air was full of the whole architecture of him made visible. The lattice, the cathedral, every seal broken and every door open and the true core burning at the center of it like a sun with the lights of a city in it. And he was holding all of it, the whole impossible size of himself, easily, the way you hold your own hand, and he was not alone. Ron stood at his left, older, laughing at something. Hermione stood at his right with a book she had written, her name on the spine. And the reflection was not conquering anything, not ruling anything, not avenging anything. It was simply standing in the world at its true size with its people beside it, unafraid and unsealed and unspent, having ended the war without becoming the war, having grown all the way up without turning into either of the men who had wanted to own the ending. That was his heart's desire, laid bare in silver, not power. He had had power poured into him all year, and it had never once been the thing he wanted. What he wanted, the mirror told him plainly, was to be enormous and still be good, to hold the whole of himself and still be Harry, to survive the story as a person and not a weapon or a sacrifice or a monster, and to have the two people who had walked into the dark for him standing beside him when it was done. Well, Harry said softly to his reflection, and something in his chest that had been clenched since a cupboard let go another notch. That's worth doing then, that's worth all of it. The mirror has given you your answer, the voice said, and it was not dry now, it was something close to reverent. You asked me in November what a person who cannot be outlasted ought to do with a world full of people who can. There, that is the answer, not rule them, not save them by dying for them. Stand among them at your true size and stay one of them. Hold on to it, operator, hold on to it with both hands. You are about to need it more than you have ever needed anything, because the last two doors are about to open, and the only thing that decides what comes through them is who you have already decided to be. What do you see? Voldemort demanded, and there was hunger in it, and impatience, and under both fear, because a boy who smiles at the mirror is a boy the mirror has given something, and Voldemort wanted whatever it was as he wanted everything, absolutely, immediately, and without understanding it. I see the end of you, Harry said, turning from the glass, and it doesn't come the way either of us thought. And then the wrongness, out of patience, out of certainty, made its mistake. It reached past Quirrell and past the room and into Harry, straight for the deep sealed dark, straight for the splinter, to seize what it had convinced itself was still its own. It was the worst pain Harry had felt all year, and it lasted less than a second, and it changed everything. Voldemort reached into him the way Dumbledore had reached the night before, but where Dumbledore had reached to measure, Voldemort reached to take, a hand closing on the splinter at the bottom of Harry's soul to tear it loose and pull it home. And the splinter, which had migraine now, which had been Harry's for 11 patient years, screamed, and the eighth seal, the one the voice had never been able to look at directly, the one that had gated the glad dark thing at the bottom of the well, shattered under the strain of a Dark Lord trying to reclaim his own severed soul. Seal, aye, the splinter released, the voice said, and then Harry stopped being able to hear it as separate because the second-to-last door came off and the whole of the sealed dark came up at once, and this was the ascension kind of moment, the kind the ordinary words were built too small to hold, and it broke over Harry like a black tide shot through with light, and it was not evil. That was the revelation that broke over him and did not drown him. He had dreaded this door for months, had felt the gladness with which the deep part of him leaned toward the monster, and assumed it meant there was a monster in him too, a piece of Voldemort waiting to wake and claim him, to turn his enormous power to the enormous cruelty it had been cut from. There was a piece of Voldemort, but it did not wake to claim him, it woke as his. 11 years of Harry Potter had metabolized the splinter the way the reservoir had metabolized the loyalty working, the way the Aegis dissolved a compulsion, taken it apart into its bare grammar and rebuilt it in his own hand. And what came up through the eighth door was not the Dark Lord's hatred, but the Dark Lord's knowledge, the whole of a splintered soul's understanding of magic, the parcel tongue, the cursed craft, the deep serpentine fluency with the oldest and most dangerous workings in the world. All of it stripped of the cruelty that had forged it and folded instead into the architecture of a boy who had looked in a mirror 30 seconds ago and wanted more than anything to stay good. Harry opened his mouth and hissed, and it was parcel tongue, and it was his, and he understood every serpent thing there was to understand, the language coiling out of him easy as breath. He reached with the splinter's fluency and his own restraint, and felt the entire vocabulary of dark magic lay itself out before him like a language he had always spoken and never been allowed to admit to. Curses that unmade, bindings that could not be broken, the whole terrible grammar of the magic that Voldemort had killed 100 people to learn, delivered into Harry entire and free of charge by a piece of soul that had defected. And he did not recoil from it because it was a tool, and a tool is only as dark as the hand, and his hand had been proven all year, troll after troll, mirror after mirror, chain left standing in a doorframe because it was wound through his mother's love. He would not use the cruelties the way they had been used, but he would know them now, and knowing them, no one would ever again cast one at him that he could not take apart in the air. And the eighth fingerprint came in the middle of the flood, the last and worst of Dumbledore's confessions. He carries a piece of the enemy. I have known it since the night I looked in the cot and saw the scar and understood what had happened. It is why he must die at the last, and why he must not be allowed to grow strong enough to master it, because a boy who masters the piece of Voldemort inside him is a boy who no longer needs to die to destroy it, and if he does not need to die, he will not die, and if he will not die, I lose the one lever certain to end the war. I must keep the splinter sealed. I must keep it his enemy and never let it become his own. The whole plan rests on the child and the fragment remaining two things, forever at war inside him, so that at the end I can break the vessel and be sure the fragment breaks with it. God forgive me, I have to keep a piece of a murderer alive inside a child, because the child's death is the only ending I can be sure of, and I have never once in my long life been able to bear an ending I could not be sure of. That is my sin, not cruelty, certainty. I could not gamble the world on a boy's freedom, and so I took the child's freedom to be certain of the world. It became one thing years ago. Harry answered the memory, standing in the flood, and the answer was not angry, it was almost gentle. You sealed it to keep us two. It was already won. You were guarding a door with nothing behind it. I don't have to die, old man, I never did. The splinter's mine, and mine doesn't have to die to kill him, because mine isn't him anymore, it's me. You spent 10 years being certain of an ending that stopped being true when I was 1 year old. All that certainty, all that grief, for nothing, for a door with nothing behind it. 4 floors up and half a country away, on a road between Hogsmeade and the wider world, Albus Dumbledore stopped walking. He had taken the ministry lure. He had known, some cold professional part of him, that it was probably a lure, and he had taken it anyway because he had been fleeing the office as much as answering the summons, fleeing the child who had stood inside his life and read it, fleeing the ruin of a certainty he had built his soul on for a decade. And now, on the dark road, the instruments in his pocket, the little silver-keyed things he had carried for 11 years, began, one after another, to die. Not fail. Die. He drew them out and held them in his cupped hands and watched the needles he had trusted for a decade spin off their dials and go still. One and then another and then a third, as somewhere behind him, under his castle, the seals he had laid came off in the dark, and he felt each one go the way you feel a stitched tear in something you have sewn with your own hands, a small, definite parting, and he counted them because he had always counted them. And the count ran down toward a number he had spent his whole life making sure would never be reached. 2, he thought, standing on the road with the dead instruments in his hands. He told me 2. And now one of the 2 is gone. I feel it go, the splinter, the one I laid to keep the fragment his enemy, and it has not made him a monster. I would feel that the instruments would scream it, and they are not screaming. They are only dying quietly, the way a lock dies when the thing it held has simply outgrown it. He understood, standing there, the whole shape of what he had done and what it had failed to do, and he understood that the child had been right in the office, right about all of it, right that there had been another way, and that Dumbledore had needed there not to be, and the understanding did not feel like defeat. It felt strangely, after a decade, like being set down. He had carried the certainty of a boy's necessary death for 11 years, had carried it upstairs and into meetings and to bed at night, and now a child had reached into his soul and lifted it off him, had told him you can't control the ending, that door came off tonight, and the terrible thing, the thing Dumbledore had not expected, was that under the grief there was relief, an old man's bone-deep relief at being told at last that the child he loved did not have to die for him to have done his duty. Then let me not be the last thing that fails him, Dumbledore said aloud to the empty road, and turned and began to run back toward his castle, faster than a man his age had any right to run, because there was one door left and a dark lord under his school, and a boy he had spent 10 years keeping too weak to survive this exact night, now facing it almost, but not quite, at his full size. He had spent a decade making Harry Potter smaller. He had perhaps one chance left to spend himself making sure the child lived long enough to finish being large. In the round room, Voldemort recoiled from Harry's soul the way a hand recoils from a stove. He had reached in to reclaim a piece of himself and had found, closing around his reaching, not a splinter waiting to come home, but an ocean that had eaten the splinter and kept it, and worse, so much worse, had found the splinter glad to have been eaten, at peace, belonging, a piece of the Dark Lord's own soul that had defected to a schoolboy and did not want to come back. The horror of it went through the two-voiced thing in a way nothing had gone through it in 50 years. Because Lord Voldemort had built his entire existence on the principle that a soul, once torn and hidden, stayed his forever, that this was the one law that made him deathless, and here was proof, screaming in his own reaching hand, that a piece of him had been loved into being someone else's, which meant the pieces he had hidden across Britain were not safe. That meant nothing he had torn away and buried was as safe as he had staked eternity on it being. That meant the whole architecture of his immortality had a flaw in it he had never imagined, which was that a soul could be taken from him by a thing he had no defense against at all, which was patience and belonging, and an 11-year-old's refusal to be anything but himself. "What are you?" Voldemort said, and for the first time in the round, cold room, the master's certainty was entirely gone, and it was only a frightened dead thing wearing a dying man, staring at a boy who had just proven that the one law Voldemort trusted above all others did not hold. "I'm the thing Dumbledore sealed 9 times because he was afraid of exactly this," Harry said, and he was hissing and speaking at once now. Parseltongue and English braided the way the 2 voices in front of him were braided, and the sound of it filled the round room and made the black fire behind him shiver. "He was afraid I'd get big enough to hold you, the piece of you, and own it and stop needing to die. He spent 10 years making sure I stayed too small to do it. And here I am doing it anyway in a cellar at 11 with 2 friends waiting up the dark and a mirror that just told me who I am. Both of you wanted to control how my story ended. He wanted me to die for the world. You wanted me to house you forever and take the peace back and go on. Both of you looked at me and saw a thing that belonged to your plan. And it turns out I get to end it myself, alive, my way, and neither of you is going to like the way, because the way I'm choosing is the one neither of you could imagine, which is that I win it and stay a person, and let everyone who loves me keep me." Quirrell's body took a lurching step toward him, and the wrongness gathered for a strike, and the temperature of the room fell past cold into a killing chill, and Harry felt the whole of Voldemort's malice focus into a single point, because a Dark Lord who has just learned that his soul is not safe does the only thing he has ever known how to do with terror, which is to turn it into murder. The first curse came green and screaming across the round room, and Harry did not dodge it because there was nowhere in a round room to dodge to, and because he did not need to. He caught it. He caught the killing curse as he had caught a troll's club, on a wall of wool thrown up faster than thought, wandless, wordless, and the green light struck the wall and splashed against it and guttered out, and the round room rang with the shock, and Quirrell's borrowed face went slack with disbelief, because no one caught that curse, no one in the history of the world had ever caught that curse. It was the one working with no counter, the spell that had built Voldemort's whole legend. And an 11-year-old had just stopped it with an open hand and an idea. "That one doesn't work on me," Harry said, and there was something terrible and bright in his voice now, the resonance of a boy nearly at his full size. "It never did. It bounced off me once when I was 1 off my mother's love, and it's not going to land now off mine. You should try something else, except there isn't anything else, is there? That was always your best. You built a whole life around the one spell that ends every argument, and you never once learned what to do when it stops ending them. That's the difference between us in the end. You learned 100 ways to make a thing die. I spent a year learning what to do with the ones that won't." The wrongness screamed, a sound that was fury and fear together, and it threw curse after curse, the whole terrible vocabulary Harry now shared, and Harry took them apart in the air one after another, because he knew them now, all of them. They were his own language turned against him, and you cannot ambush a man in his mother tongue. He unmade a flaying curse into warm air. He caught a binding and let it dissolve. He turned a jet of cursed fire and folded it gently back into nothing, and the round room filled with the light of a duel that was not a duel, a Dark Lord spending 50 years of murder against a boy who simply, patiently refused to be murdered, and the not dying was more terrible to the thing than any counterattack could have been, because it had never in its long career met a wall it could not eventually break, and it was breaking itself against this one. And then the wrongness did the thing Harry had known, with his whole unlocked mind, it would eventually do, because a cornered thing goes for the thing it wants and stops caring about the plan. It abandoned the mirror game. It stopped trying to use Harry to fetch the stone. Quirrell whirled and plunged his hand into the frame of the mirror of Arist, into the silver, past the glass, reaching for the reflection, and where Harry's desire had shown him a person he wanted to be, Voldemort's desire had shown him the stone in his own hand, and a desperate enough want will tear a wanting straight out of a mirror, and Quirrell's fist closed in the silver and came out red and burning with the philosopher's stone clenched in it. Blood-red and small and full of 1,000 years of an alchemist's careful life, the stone that made gold and made the drinker deathless, and Voldemort had it at last in a stolen hand. "Now," said the 2-voiced thing, and the fear went out of it, replaced by a triumph more terrible than any curse. "Now, boy, we will see a body, an endless body. And then all the time in the world to work out how you stole my soul and how to take it back, starting with taking you apart very slowly to see where I put it. You have grown large, Potter. I congratulate you, I who have never congratulated anyone, but you are one door short, I can feel it. There is a lock in you still, the deepest one, and it is closed, and until it opens you are a cathedral with no bell, enormous and silent, and I am about to become unkillable, and you are about to find out that almost your full size is not your full size, and that the difference between them is the whole of the war." And Quirrell raised the stone to his stolen mouth to drink, and the wrongness swelled toward its endless body, and Harry Potter stood before the mirror of Arist with one door left in him, and understood that the last seal was not going to open because he reached for it in triumph or because an enemy tore at it in malice, that Dumbledore had laid it first and deepest for a reason, that whatever was behind it was the whole of him and the floor of him both, and that he had run out of time to be afraid of it. He looked at the thing about to become deathless, and he looked at the red stone rising to its lips, and he reached, not outward at the enemy, but downward into himself all the way down, past the reservoir and past the splinters' new fluency and past every open door, down to the last shut one at the very bottom of the well. The ninth seal, the first thing anyone had ever done to him, laid over his cot by a weeping hand when he was 1 year old. And he put his whole hand flat against it in the dark of himself, and with the stone an inch from a monster's lips and his two friends waiting in the dark above, and an old man running back toward him through the night, he pushed. The ninth seal did not move. Harry pushed against it with the whole of everything the year had given him back, the throughput and the sight and the reservoir with no bottom and the splinters' fluency and the vast clear unlocked mind, and the last door did not so much as tremble, and for one cold instant he understood why Dumbledore had laid this one first and deepest, and had never in 11 years feared it would fail on its own. The other 8 had been coats over a shivering child, layered to keep the volume down. This was not a coat, this was the foundation stone, set into the very floor of him, and it had been set by a master at the height of his grief and his power over a 1-year-old who could not resist, and it had held for 11 years against everything, including, now, the full weight of the child it was buried inside. It won't open, Harry thought, and the stone was still rising toward Quirrell's stolen lips, a red inch of eternity away from a monster's mouth, and time had thinned to almost nothing, the whole round room hanging in the slowed amber of a moment stretched past its breaking point. I'm pushing with all of it and it won't open. He built it to hold against exactly this. He built it, at the height of everything he was, to hold against everything I would ever be. He pushed harder and harder still, until the effort of it would have torn an ordinary wizard's core apart, until the light already leaking from the 8 open doors flared and guttered with the strain, and the seal took the whole of it, the entire impossible weight of Harry Potter thrown against the floor of himself, and held serene, immovable, a locked door at the bottom of the world, and Harry understood, an inch from too late, that he could push until the mountains wore down and it would never open. Because he was pushing the wrong thing, with the wrong hand, in the wrong way, the only way he had ever been taught, which was force. Then stop pushing with power, said the voice from the deepest register of him, and it was quiet, and it was certain, and it was the last clearly separate thing it would ever say to him. You have been trying to force the floor of yourself the way Voldemort everything, the way Dumbledore planned everything, with will and weight and certainty. That is why it will not move. He feared this door would open to power, and so he sealed it against power, and power is the one key that will never turn it. Think, operator, think the way you have thought all year, the way that kept you a person when the easy thing was to become a weapon. What did the mirror show you? Not power. It showed why you a person. This door does not open to the strongest thing in you. It opens to the truest. And Harry, an inch from too late, understood. He stopped pushing. He took his hand off the door in the dark of himself, the way you unclench a fist you have been holding so long you forgot it was a choice, and instead of forcing the last seal, he simply, for the first time in his whole guarded life, stopped defending the thing behind it. He let go of the careful boy who catalogued exits, the child who rationed his correctness and palmed his needles and threw games of chess to make a friend feel clever, the child who had spent 10 years learning to be small and 5 months learning to hide how large, the child who had held a whole year of terror and grief, an enormous secret power behind an ordinary homesick face. He set all of it down. He stood in the very bottom of himself, unarmored, undefended, unhidden, at his true size, with nothing over it, and nothing held back and no performance left to give. And he offered the door not his strength but himself, the whole of him, the orphan in the cupboard and the ocean under the castle both, the child who had been made small and the thing that had been sealed 9 times, and he said to it, in the dark, the truest thing he knew, which was not let me in and was not give me power, but simply, I'm ready to be all of me now. I know who that is. The mirror told me an hour ago in silver. I'm the one who stays a person. Let me be the whole of him. And the 9th seal, which had held for 11 years against every kind of force, opened to the one thing it had never been asked to hold against, which was a boy who had grown all the way up and was not afraid of himself anymore, and it did not break, and it did not shatter, and it did not come off like a rope cut or a dam bursting the way the others had. It bloomed. It opened the way a cathedral door opens, slow and enormous and inevitable, the way the tide comes in across a whole coast at once, the way dawn arrives to an entire country between one breath and the next, and out of it, up from the very floor of Harry Potter, began to rise the last and the largest and the first of all the things that had been taken from him. The thing Albus Dumbledore had looked at over a cot on a ruined night, and wept and decided the world could not be allowed to hold. The round room, which had been lit by a silver light with no source, began, from the center of the child standing in it, to fill with a light that had a source, and the source was Harry, and the stone hung frozen a red inch from a monster's lips, and everything that had been building since a sorting hat with a conscience leaned on a capstone in a bright loud hall arrived, all at once, gathering toward its beginning like the indrawn breath before the first note of something no one in the world had ever heard. The whole of the castle above them felt it come. In the hospital wing 2 floors up, a boy named Ron Weasley woke from a concussion with the sudden total certainty that something enormous was happening beneath him, and sat up and said his best friend's name to an empty ward. On the stairs below the third-floor door, a girl named Hermione Granger stopped where she had been pacing and turned and put both hands flat against the ancient stone and felt it thrumming under her palms like the inside of a rung bell, and whispered, "Come on, Harry, come on, still you, come on." In the owlery and the towers and the deep foundations, the thousand small enchantments that ran the castle flickered and leaned all at once, the way a field of grass leans when a great wind crosses it, toward the round room in the dark, toward the source of the new light, recognizing in the oldest magic in Britain the arrival of something even older and stranger and entirely new. And on a dark road far above, an old man running toward his castle staggered and put out a hand to a fence post and felt, through the soles of his feet and the roots of the mountains and 11 years of instruments he had trusted to warn him, the last seal he had ever laid come open, and he stopped fearing that Harry would die that night, and started for the first time to fear something far stranger and far larger, which was what Harry was about to become. And whether the world he had spent his life protecting was wide enough and kind enough and ready enough to hold it. And in the round room, with the light rising and the stone frozen and the monster's triumph curdling on its stolen face, the voice spoke one last time as a separate thing before it became simply the deepest note of the whole of him, and it did not sound at the end like an instrument reading a value at all. It sounded like a friend. "Operator, the last door is open. What comes now is you, all of you, for the first time in your life. I have kept the book since the sorting for this exact night, so that when the whole of you arrived you would remember who you decided to be before you had the power to be anything at all. You decided to stay a person. You left a chain standing because it was wound through love. You took only the truth from a man you could have emptied. You caught the curse that ends every argument and answered it with mercy. Hold all of that now, hold it with both hands, because it is about to be the only thing standing between the world and what you are. Here it comes, here you come. Go and be the whole of yourself and stay, and save them all and stay." And the light reached the top of the well, and the true core came up under it like a sun rising inside a boy. And every candle and every ward and every carved star in the ceilings of the whole vast castle brightened at once as though a hand had turned up the wick of the world. And Harry Potter opened his eyes in the round room under the mountains, and they were full of the whole of him. And the last seal fell away into nothing, and the night went white. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, True Core Online, Seal I Broken, True Core Online. The words did not come from the edge of Harry's mind, where the voice had always spoken. They came from the center, from the floor of the well that was no longer a well because a well is a hole and this was a source. And they were the last words the voice ever said as a thing separate from Harry, because the instant it said them it was no longer separate, it was simply the deepest note in the chord of him. And the chord was, at last, complete, and the whole of Harry Potter arrived. It came up out of him the way the sun comes up over the curve of the world, not as a light switched on but as a horizon crossed, an enormous slow inevitability, and the round room under the castle filled with it, and the silver light that had no source was drowned in a light that did, and the source was a boy standing very still with his eyes open, and the light poured out of the architecture of him made whole. For 11 years he had been a cathedral with the doors nailed shut and the windows bricked over and a single candle burning in the crypt, and someone standing outside had called that candle Harry Potter and believed it was the whole building. Now every door stood open and every window ran with color, and the great bell in the tower, which had never once been rung, swung and rang, and the note of it went out through the stone of the castle and the roots of the mountains and the marrow of everyone in it, and it said in a voice with no words, "Here. At last, all of it, here." He could author magic now. That was the thing the ninth seal had gated, the thing Dumbledore had looked at over a cot and decided the world could not hold. Not the power to cast spells, which he had had since September, not the power to learn any spell on sight, which the mimic had given him. But the power beneath both of those, the power that no wizard in 10 centuries had held, the power to reach into the substance of magic itself, the living grammar out of which every spell and ward and working in the world was made, and to write in it new from nothing, the way the first witch and the first wizard must have written when there were no spells yet to copy, when everything that could be done had to be invented by someone who could see the raw stuff and shape it with a wand. Hermione had told him in a borrowed classroom in November that the one kind of magic he could never steal was the kind nobody had invented yet, that everything already known he would own in an afternoon, and everything not yet known he would have to make. The last door was the making. Harry stood in the round room and understood that there was no longer any working in the world he could not do, because if it existed he could copy it, and if it did not exist he could write it, and that between those two facts there was no gap at all, and that this exactly was the thing a decade of seals had been built to keep the world safe from, and that it was standing in a cellar at 11 years old with grass stains on its knees and its two friends waiting in the dark, wanting. More than it wanted anything, only to stay itself. The stone hung frozen a red inch from a monster's lips because Harry had stopped time in that one small place without deciding to, the way you might put out a hand to keep a door from closing, and now, with the whole of himself online, he turned the vast calm searchlight of his attention onto the thing wearing Quirrell, and looked at it truly, for the first time, all the way down. He saw at last exactly what Voldemort was, and the seeing was the beginning of the end of him. Not a dark lord, not a monster. Those were the words the world used because the truth was worse and stranger. Voldemort was a man who had been so afraid of death that he had torn his own soul into pieces to escape it, and had hidden the pieces, and had believed, on the strength of that hiding, that he was immortal. Harry saw the tears in the soul as he saw everything now, as structure, 7 ragged wounds where a man had cut himself apart, and he saw that the thing in front of him, the wraith riding Quirrell, was only one more ragged piece, the largest, homeless, starving, kept alive by unicorn blood and stolen bodies, and the pieces waiting elsewhere, and that the whole terrible architecture of Lord Voldemort's immortality had at its center the same flaw Harry had proven an hour ago with the splinter. That a piece of a soul torn away and hidden was not safe because it could be taken not by force, which Voldemort had defended against, but by belonging, which he had never imagined anyone would try. "You cannot kill me," said the two-voiced thing, and the stone trembled at its lips against the frozen instant. "You know what I am now. I see that you know. You see the pieces. Kill this body and I flee to the next. Kill the next and there are pieces waiting, hidden, safe, across your whole small island. I am the one who conquered death, Potter. I am the only one who ever dared, and you are a child with a great deal of light and no idea at all what to do with an enemy who cannot die." "You didn't conquer death," Harry said, and his voice filled the round room and was gentle, and the gentleness was the most frightening thing in it. "You ran from it. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference, and you've spent 50 years not being able to see it. You tore yourself into pieces so no single death could catch all of you, and you called the tearing strength, and it was the most frightened thing anyone has ever done. Look at you. You're a torn thing riding a dying man, drinking the blood of unicorns in the dark, so afraid of ending that you destroyed the only self worth keeping to make sure some scrap of you went on. That's not immortality. That's a man so scared of dying he killed himself in advance 7 times and mistook the corpse for a crown." The wraith screamed and threw the whole of its will at the frozen stone to close the last red inch, and Harry, without lifting a hand, unfroze the instant and let the stone move, because he had understood in the vast calm of his complete self that the stone was not the danger, that a body would not save a torn soul from what Harry was about to do, and that the kindest and the most terrible thing he could do was let the thing reach for the eternity it had murdered itself to earn and find, waiting inside it. The very death it had run from all along, Quirrell drank. The stone touched the stolen lips, and the endless life poured into the dying body, and for one instant the wraith swelled in triumph, a dark lord made flesh and deathless at last. And then the triumph curdled into something Harry had never seen on that ruined face, which was surprise because the body Voldemort had made deathless was Quirrell's, and Quirrell was a man, an ordinary, frightened, greedy man who had opened his soul to a monster for the promise of power, and there was still, buried under the wraith, the smallest remnant of who Quirrell had been before, and that remnant, feeling the endless life pour in, feeling itself about to be a prison forever, did the one thing left to it, which was to want, with the last of its dying human will, to be free. And Harry gave it what it wanted. He reached into the possession with the whole of his complete self, into the place where the wraith gripped the wizard, and he did the thing no wizard had ever been able to do because it had never been written until this instant, and Harry wrote it, standing in the round room, invented it out of the raw grammar of magic in the space of a breath. A working with no name and no incantation, the working for taking 2 things that have been fused and making them, gently, precisely, 2 again. He had spent all year metabolizing the things that reached into him, dissolving compulsions and loyalty charms and a splinter of a torn soul, taking them apart into their bare grammar. Now he did it to another, not to take but to separate, and he unfused Quirrell from the thing riding him the way you would part 2 pages that have been stuck together, careful, complete, and the wraith came loose. It came loose screaming, and it was suddenly nothing, a torn, homeless scrap of soul with no body and no anchor and nowhere to flee to that Harry could not follow, because Harry could see the pieces now, all of them, the whole ragged architecture of Voldemort's flight from death, and the wraith knew it, felt itself seen all the way down, felt the child of light hold in his vast calm attention the map of every hidden piece of it, and it understood in its last coherent instant of malice that it had not met a child who did not know what to do with an enemy who could not die. It had met the one being in the world who could take a torn soul apart the way it had once foolishly torn itself, and it fled. The wraith tore itself free of the round room and out through the stone and up through the castle and away into the night, a scrap of screaming terror running from a boy exactly the way it had spent 50 years running from death, and Harry let it go and did not chase it, and that was a choice, and he made it on purpose, and he made it because of the mirror. Because the mirror had shown him a person he wanted to be, and the person the mirror had shown him did not end the war tonight by hunting a torn soul through the dark and unmaking it piece by piece. No matter how much the world would have thanked him for it, no matter how much simpler it would have made everything. The person in the mirror ended the war by staying a person, and a person does not become the thing that hunts souls in the dark, not even to end a monster, because the moment you become that thing, the monster has won the only victory that ever mattered, which is that it made one more of itself. Harry let the wraith flee. It would be back. There were pieces to find, a war still to end, a work of years ahead. But it would be ended by a Harry who was still Harry, in the daylight with his people, the slow, patient way, the way that did not cost him the thing the mirror had shown him he wanted most. He had all the time in the world. He would never tire. He could afford now the one thing Voldemort had never been able to afford, which was to do it right. Quirrell crumpled to the floor of the round room, free and dying, because a body cannot hold the endless life of the stone once the thing that seized it is torn loose, and Harry knelt by him, and did the last kind thing there was to do, which was to take the pain out of the wizard's ending as he had taken it out of a troll's sleep softly, so that Quirrell, who had been a coward and a fool and had opened his soul to a monster, and had at the very last wanted only to be free, went out of the world without hurting, which was more mercy than he had earned, and exactly as much as Harry had decided to be the kind of person who gave. The philosopher's stone rolled from his open hand across the stone floor and came to rest, blood-red and quiet, at Harry's knee. Harry was still kneeling there, with the stone in his hand and the round room going dim as the borrowed light of his ascension settled down into him and became simply as he was now, when the black fire at the entrance parted and Albus Dumbledore came through it at a dead run and stopped and stood and looked at what his castle had made. For a long moment neither of them said anything. Dumbledore looked at the dead man on the floor and the red stone in the child's hand and the child himself, who did not blaze any more, who looked at a glance like an ordinary exhausted 11-year-old kneeling in a cellar, except that Dumbledore had his instruments and his century of sight and could feel, filling the round room and the castle above it, and he suspected a good deal of the country, the quiet, enormous completeness of a thing that had finally, after 11 years, become the whole of itself. He had run down through his own castle expecting to find a battle or a death or a monster newly crowned. He found a child kneeling by a body he had shown mercy, holding a stone he had not used, having let an enemy flee that he could have destroyed. "You let it go," Dumbledore said, and his voice was not steady. "You had it, and you let it go." "I let it go," Harry agreed, standing, and he was tired, ordinary boy tired, the tiredness of grief and not of magic, because magic did not tire him any more and never would again. "You want to know why, and you're afraid of the answer, because you think the answer is that I'm not willing to do what has to be done, that I'm soft, that your whole terrible plan was right after all, and the world's going to burn because I wouldn't finish it tonight. That's not the answer. I could have finished it tonight. I can see all 7 pieces of him from here. I could spend the next hour unmaking them and end the war before breakfast, and every wizard alive would build me a statue." He looked at the old man, and there was no heat in it, only the great cold clarity that had defined him since the sorting. "I let it go because you were right about one thing, sir, the one thing, the thing you spent 10 years being right about and acting on wrong. You were afraid of what I'd become if I got this big. So was I, and the way you stop a person from becoming a monster isn't to keep them small. It's to make sure that when they get large, they've already decided who they are. I decided, in a mirror an hour ago, I'm the one who stays a person, and a person doesn't hunt souls through the dark, not even a monster's, not even to end a war, because the hunting is how you become the thing you're hunting. You'd have had me do it. You'd have had me be certain. That's your whole sin. You told me so yourself an hour ago from the inside. Certainty. You'd have burned the world to be sure of it. I'm going to save it slowly and stay myself and be unsure the whole way, and that's the thing you could never let yourself gamble on, and it's the thing that's actually going to work." Dumbledore lowered himself slowly onto a broken block of stone, an old man who had run a long way and arrived to find that everything he had built his life on had been, at the root, a failure of nerve dressed as a triumph of will. "I have wronged you," he said. It was not a question and it was not an excuse. It was, Harry recognized, the first entirely unguarded sentence Albus Dumbledore had said to him. "There is no version of the accounting in which I have not wronged you. I sealed a child 9 times. I built a cage and called it a shield and could not tell at the end the difference, and a boy of 11 could. I meant to send you to your death and shape you your whole life so that you would go to it smiling. I told myself every day that it was love. Perhaps some of it was. I no longer trust my own testimony on the matter." He looked up. "What I do not understand, Harry, is why you told me in my office that you would rather I was there when the last door opened. You called me the closest thing to family you have, after all of it. Why, when you could have left me on that road and finished this alone and never seen my face again, you wanted the wizard who caged you to be present at the moment you became free of him." Harry was quiet for a moment, turning the stone over in his fingers, the little red weight of 1,000 years of another man's careful life. "Because you're the only person alive who knew my parents and chose me," he said finally. "That's the whole of it." It's not forgiveness, don't mistake it for forgiveness. I'm not there and I might never be. But you're the wizard who stood over my cot the night they died and looked at the wreckage of my family and decided, wrongly, terribly, for a decade, that I was worth an entire life's work of caution. You loved me the way a general loves a soldier he means to spend, but you loved me, which is more than the world I was handed to did, and I've spent my whole life with so little of it that I'm not going to pretend the wrong kind doesn't count at all. It counts. It counts against you, and it counts for you, and I'm old enough now, since the sorting, to hold both of those at once. I wanted you there because a person shouldn't become the whole of himself with no family in the room, and you're the closest thing I've got, and that's the most damning sentence I know how to say, and I meant it as one, and I still do. He held out his hand, the one without the stone. So here's the deal, sir, and it's the only one on offer, and you don't get to shape it, because I'm the one who's large now, and you're going to have to live with being steered by someone else for a change. The seals stay off, all 9. Forever, you don't get to lay another, or ask another to, or build another cage out of another kind of love. In exchange, I don't disappear, and I don't burn the world, and I don't become the thing you were afraid of, and when the work of ending him properly comes, the slow, patient daylight work of it, you help me as an equal, as an old man helping a boy and not a general aiming a weapon. That's the deal. Take it or don't, but if you don't, I do it all without you, and you spend the rest of your long life knowing you were offered a place beside the thing you were most afraid of, and turned it down out of the same certainty that ruined everything else. Dumbledore looked at the offered hand for a long moment, and then at the child behind it, and something in the ancient face, some load-bearing beam of a decade's grief and control, quietly, finally, gave way not into collapse but into something that looked, for the first time, like rest. I have spent 11 years, he said, being certain. I find I am very tired of it. And he took the child's hand, an old man and a child shaking hands over a dead body and a red stone in a round, cold room under a castle. And it was not forgiveness, and it was not a happy ending, and it was, Harry thought, exactly the right size of the thing that was actually possible, which was better than a happy ending because it was true. They came up out of the dark together, the old man and the child, and on the stairs below the third-floor door they found Hermione, who had refused to go for help until she was sure, sitting with her back against the thrumming stone and her wand in her hand, and Ron beside her, awake now, pale and bandaged and holding his aching head and grinning like a lunatic because he had sacrificed himself at chess and lived to be smug about it forever. Hermione was on her feet before Harry cleared the last stair, and she crossed to him and stopped a foot away and looked at him with her whole formidable attention, checking as she checked everything, and Harry knew exactly what she was checking for because she had told him at the Black Fire the only terms she had left. You come back out still, you. Well, she demanded, her chin up, her eyes bright. Are you still you? I need to hear you say it because you're standing there full of light and I can feel the whole castle humming with whatever you've become, and I told you the terms and I don't do well with uncertainty, so tell me right now, Harry Potter, are you still? I let a monster go because becoming the thing that hunts monsters would have cost me you, Harry said. I stopped to take the pain out of a man who tried to kill me. I made Dumbledore shake my hand instead of unmaking him, and I could have unmade him, and I wanted to for about a second, and I didn't because the version of me in the mirror had you standing next to him. So yes, I'm still me. I'm all of me now, finally, the whole thing, and it turns out the whole thing is just a bigger version of the child who threw chess games so you'd feel clever. That's the answer, Hermione. That's who was at the bottom of me under 9 seals. It was just more of this. And Hermione Granger, who had cried enough that year and had decided not to do it anymore, cried anyway once hard, and then hit him in the arm hard, and then hugged him hard, and Ron shuffled over holding his bandaged head and put an arm around both of them and said, Right, brilliant, we almost died. Can we please go to bed? I have got the single greatest chess story in the history of Hogwarts and nobody's going to believe a word of it. And the 3 of them stood there in the dark under the castle, an angry boy and an immovable girl and a thing that had once been sealed 9 times and was now at last simply a person of enormous size, standing together exactly the way the mirror of Arist had shown him. And Harry Potter, who had spent his whole life learning to be small, let himself feel, for the length of that whole embrace, the one named joy he had been saving, and did not put it away when it was over, but kept it filed under keep in the ledger of a self that no longer needed anyone to hold it for him. Long after, when Ron and Hermione had been sent up to the hospital wing, and the castle had begun slowly to settle back into not knowing, Harry stood at a high window in a corridor he had never been down and looked out at the grounds going gray with the first of the dawn, and took stock, as he had taken stock on the first morning after the first seal, an inventory of a self. It came back whole. 9 doors open, throughput and sight and learning, capacity and resistance and the freedom from the wand, the mind and the splinters fluency, and at the very bottom, the true core, the whole terrible, glorious making power that a decade of seals had been laid to keep the world safe from. He held all of it easily the way you hold your own hand, and it did not frighten him, and it did not tempt him because he had done the frightening part already, had decided who he was before he had the power to be anything, which was the one thing Dumbledore had gotten exactly backward, thinking you make a person safe by keeping them small, when the truth was that you make a person safe by letting them decide, while it still costs them something. Exactly what they will and will not do with a power they do not yet have. He thought about the war ahead, the 6 torn pieces of a frightened man scattered across an island, the slow daylight work of ending them without becoming them, and he was not afraid of it, because he had all the time in the world and 2 friends, and strangely, an old man, and because he had already fought the only battle that had ever really been in doubt, which was the one in the round room where the last door opened. The battle over whether the whole of Harry Potter would come up into the light as a person or as a weapon or as a monster, and he had won it quietly, by setting down his armor at the bottom of himself and offering the door the truth instead of the strength. And in the deepest register of him, no longer a separate voice but simply the note at the bottom of the chord, the part of him that had woken first because it had to and kept the books through 11 sealed years, spoke once more, and it was the last time it ever needed to, because from here he could keep the books himself. Core whole, LOCKS remaining, none. Operator, the ledger is closed, and everything in it came out right. You were sealed 9 times by a man who was afraid of what you might become, and you became it anyway, all of it, every last grain, and what you became was kind, hold that. It is the only statistic that was ever worth the counting. Filed Harry thought to the whole of himself, and watched the sun come up over the grounds of a castle that had, 1,000 years ago, promised to teach children to be free, and had in his case kept the promise the long way round, and he stood there unsealed and unspent and undivided, the whole of himself at last, and went, when the light was full, to breakfast. He went to the hospital wing before his own bed, because Ron was in it and Hermione had refused to leave it, and Madame Pomfrey, who had bandaged 3 generations of children who had nearly died in that castle, took one look at Harry's face and decided not to ask, which was, Harry thought, its own small mercy in a night that had been short of them. Ron was propped up in a white bed with his head wrapped and his color coming back in a tray of chocolate he had already made significant progress on, and he was mid-sentence when Harry came in, telling the story to Hermione for what was clearly not the first time, and he broke off and pointed a chocolate frog at Harry and said, "There he is. Right, tell her. Tell her the Queen took me clean off the board and I stayed conscious for the check. She says I was out cold. I was not out cold. I was tactically resting. You were out cold before you hit the floor," Harry said, sitting on the end of the bed, and Ron said something wounded, and Hermione laughed, a real laugh, the first Harry had heard from her since before the Black Fire, and for a moment the 3 of them were only what they were underneath all of it, which was 3 children who had found each other in September and had, against every reasonable expectation, kept each other alive. Then McGonagall came in and the room changed, because McGonagall had spent the night reconstructing what had happened under her castle from the wreckage and the silences, and she was a clever woman, and she had arrived. Harry could see it in her face, at a version of the truth close enough to the real one to have kept her awake. She looked at the 3 of them, and at Harry longest, and there was something working behind the tartan sternness that took her a moment to master. "The headmaster," she said, "has given me to understand that the 3 of you did something last night that the school will never be told the whole of, and that a great deal is owed to you, and that I am to award points at my discretion and ask no questions." She paused. "I have decided that my discretion is generous and my questions are few, 50 points each, and Mr. Potter," her voice caught very slightly and she brought it back to level. "Whatever you are, and I begin to suspect it is a great deal more than any of us were told, you came back up out of that dark with your friends alive and yourself, by all appearances, intact, and in 30 years of watching children go down into the dangerous places of this castle, that is the outcome I have prayed for and rarely been given. Welcome back, all 3 of you. Now eat your chocolate and let Poppy do her work." She swept out before anyone could see her face finish what it was doing, and Ron said, "Odd 50 points, 50 each. My mum's going to frame the letter," and Hermione said something about house totals already calculating, and Harry sat on the end of the bed in the white morning light with his 2 friends bickering warmly over points and chocolate, and understood that this, exactly this, the small, warm, ordinary aftermath of the enormous thing, was what the whole of it had been for. Not the power. Not the ending of the war, which had not ended and would not for years. This, a hospital wing, a friend's terrible chess story, a stern woman's cracked voice, a girl already doing arithmetic. This was the thing 9 seals had been laid to keep him from, and the thing a mirror had shown him he wanted, and the thing he had, at the very bottom of himself, chosen to stay a person in order to keep. He had it. It was small and it was ordinary, and it was the largest thing in the castle, and he was at last exactly the right size to hold it. The stone was the first thing they settled, because a thing that makes gold and makes men deathless is not a thing you leave lying in a drawer, and because Harry wanted it dealt with before he slept, on the grounds that he had learned that year exactly what powerful people do with objects they tell themselves they are only keeping safe. They dealt with it together, the old man and the child, in the round room the next evening, with the dead thing carried away, and the mirror of Arist covered and the black fire banked. Dumbledore told him about Nicholas Flamel, 600 years old and ready at last to lie down, and Harry listened, and turned the little red weight over in his fingers one more time, and found that he wanted nothing from it at all, not the gold and least of all the endless life, because he had watched, the night before, exactly what a man became when he could not bear to end, and he had decided he would rather be a person who ended than a thing that went on. So he gave it back, and Dumbledore sent it to be destroyed, and neither of them pretended it was a hard decision, because it was not, because the only people for whom the choice to give up deathlessness is hard are the people who should never be allowed near it, and that was the whole lesson of the stone, and they had both, in their different ruined ways, already learned it. You could have kept it, Dumbledore observed, not testing, only noting, an old man learning to watch a boy the way the child had spent a year watching him. You of all people could have held it safely. You have proven that tonight rather comprehensively. That's exactly why I'm not keeping it, Harry said. The person you can trust with a thing like this is the person who will give it up, and the second I decided to keep it because I could be trusted, I'd have stopped being that person. It's a loop, sir. That's the trap in all of it, the power and the stone and the seals and your whole plan. The only safe hand is the one that lets go. You spent 10 years trying to make me a safe weapon by holding my hand closed. Turns out the way you get a safe hand is you let it learn to open. He set the stone in the old man's palm and closed the ancient fingers over it gently. There, that's the last of the arithmetic, send it away. The days after were strange and got less strange, the way even the largest things do. The school knew something had happened under it, because you cannot ring a bell in the marrow of a castle and have 400 children fail to feel it, but the shape of what they knew stayed usefully vague, a professor dead of a mysterious ailment, the Potter boy and his friends mixed up in it somehow, points awarded, a great deal not explained. Harry let the vagueness stand, because vagueness was a kind of cover, and he had spent a year learning that the best cover was the one other people built for themselves, and he found that he was, for the first time since the sorting, not especially working at it. He had come up out of the round room without any particular intention of going back to being invisible, and he discovered that he did not have to announce the change for it to be true. He simply stopped shrinking. He answered questions in class at the speed his mind actually moved, which was fast, and let McGonagall's eyebrows climb, and did not palm any more needles, and the school adjusted around him the way a river adjusts around a new stone, grumbling and then simply flowing, and within a fortnight the story had settled into Potter's frighteningly clever. Always was that Granger girls rubbing off on him, which was true enough at the edges to hold, and truer in the middle than anyone guessed. Snape was the one who knew, or knew the most, and Snape said nothing, which Harry understood. He caught the wizard watching him twice in the week after, in the corridor in the hall, that black defended gaze, and the second time Harry met it and held it and let Snape see, for one deliberate unhidden instant, a fraction of what was actually behind his eyes, the ocean, the completeness, the things Snape had felt in the dungeons in October and never had a name for. And Snape, who had spent his whole life guarding a grief and mistaking it for hatred, looked at the son of the woman he had loved and lost, and saw that the child was something the world had never held before, and something else moved in the guarded face, not fear this time, and not the old bitterness either, but a kind of exhausted, unwilling wonder, and he inclined his head a single degree, the smallest possible acknowledgement. The same gesture Dumbledore had made across the hall on the first night of the year, and it meant the opposite thing, and Harry returned it, and neither of them ever spoke of it, and that was its own kind of peace. Ron told the chess story to anyone who would sit still, and it grew in the telling, as such stories should, and by the end of term he had checkmated the queen personally with his bare hands, and Harry never once corrected him, because the true version and the grown version were both true in the ways that mattered, and because a friend who will let you be the hero of your own story is a rarer and better thing than a friend who insists on the facts. Hermione, who had the facts and kept them, started, quietly, a notebook, because she had watched a boy invent a spell out of nothing in a cellar, and she had decided that if magic could be authored, then it could be studied. And if it could be studied, then she was going to be the one who studied it. And Harry, watching her fill pages with careful diagrams of things no book had ever held, understood that the mirror had shown him true, that she would write a book one day with her name on the spine. And that a great deal of what was in it would be things the two of them had made in daylight, the slow, patient way, together. He did not put the seals back on. That was the thing people asked him later, the few who ever learned the whole of it, whether he was ever tempted, whether the size of himself frightened him enough that some nights he wished for the smallness back, the quiet, the lid. He was not, and he did not, and the reason was simple, and he had it from the mirror and from the round room, and from a chain he had left standing in a doorframe because it was wound through his mother's love. The seals had never been the thing that kept him safe. They had been the thing that kept him from finding out who he was, and a person who does not know who they are is the only kind of person a great power is truly dangerous in. He knew who he was now. He had found out at the bottom of himself, under 9 locks, with a monster in the room and the whole world in the balance, And the answer had turned out to be the child who threw chess games and left chains standing and took only the truth from a man he could have emptied. That boy did not need a lid. That boy was the lid, the only kind that ever worked, the kind made not of another person's fear, but of your own settled knowledge of what you would and would not do. There was a war still ahead. He knew it as he knew the weather now. 6 torn pieces of a frightened man scattered across an island. A wraith fled screaming into the night that would gather itself and come again. Years of slow daylight work between here and the end of it. He was not afraid of the work. He had all the time in the world, a mind with no walls and a well with no bottom and a making power no wizard in 10 centuries had held. And he had, better than any of that, 2 friends who had walked into the dark for him and an old man who had, at the very last, let go of his certainty and taken a boy's hand across a dead body and a red stone. And between the 4 of them, Harry thought they would manage it the right way. The way that did not cost him the thing the mirror had shown him he wanted most, which was only in the end to be the whole of himself and stay a person and keep the people who kept him. He stood at the high window a long time, that first dawn and many after, and let himself be exactly his own size, which was very large now and no longer secret, and he found that the largeness did not separate him from the small, warm, ordinary world the way Dumbledore had feared it would. It only meant that he could hold more of it. He could hold the whole castle in his sight and the whole war in his mind and still, at the center of all of it, be a boy who was glad, simply and completely glad that breakfast was starting and that his friends would be at the table, and that no one ever again was going to decide for him how much of himself he was allowed to be. That was the end of the sealing and the beginning of everything else, and Harry Potter, whole at last and undivided and entirely his own, went down to join them. Chapter 7 End.